They say every small town has one story that never fades, one tale folks keep telling on cold nights when the fire burns low and the wind pushes at the shutters. The kind of story that gets passed down until nobody remembers quite where it started, only that it matters somehow, that it says something true about the people who lived it and the land that shaped them. In Pine Ridge, Colorado, that story belongs to Rebecca Stone. I'm Martha Sullivan. I've run the general store on Main Street for 42 years now, seen people come and go, watched children grow into old folks, buried more friends than I care to count. My hands are gnarled from lifting flour sacks, and my eyes aren't what they were. But my memory's still sharp as the day I first opened my doors. The year is 1895. Outside my store window, Pine Ridge looks much the same as it did a decade ago. Same dirt street turning to mud when it rains. Same wooden sidewalks creaking under boots. Same mountains rising up beyond the last row of buildings like they've been standing guard since before there were people to guard. But things changed here. Slowly, the way things do in small towns. And it all started with Rebecca Stone and the choice she made in the autumn of 1885. A young man came through my door this morning, clean suit, smooth hands, notebook tucked under his arm. Said he was from the Denver Post. Said he was writing about Rebecca Winters, the mountain girl who became the governor's advisor on forestry and conservation. Said she was quite the legend in the capital. I had to laugh at that. Not unkindly, but because legends are polished things. They shine too bright to be real. And Rebecca's story wasn't a legend when it happened. It was harder than that, truer than that. The journalist wanted to know if the stories were accurate. Did she really marry a timber baron who pretended to be a poor mountain man? Did she really stand up to Denver society and win? Was it true she helped write the territorial conservation laws that protected half the high country? I told him yes to all of it, but those are just the facts. Facts don't tell you what it cost her. They don't tell you about the morning she left, or the way her father's hands shook when he watched her go. They don't tell you about the girl who counted pennies at my counter twice because she couldn't afford to waste a single cent. So I'm going to tell him what the newspapers won't. I'm going to tell him about Rebecca before she was anyone's legend, when she was just a young woman with dirt on her hands and worry in her green eyes, when all she wanted was to keep her family together and maybe, just maybe, have a little bit of choice about her own life. The journalist is sitting across from me now with his pencil ready. He's young enough to think stories have neat beginnings and tidy endings. He'll learn different. I start where all the best stories start, at the beginning, before anyone knew how it would turn out. The autumn of 1885 came on cold and fast. By late September, frost was already settling over the foothills each morning. The aspen trees turned gold almost overnight, bright against the dark pines. Up in the high country, the first snows were dusting the peaks. Down in Pine Ridge, folks were laying in firewood and checking their stores for winter. Rebecca Stone was 23 that year. She'd been born in that same little cabin at the edge of town where she still lived. Her mother had died 7 years earlier, when Rebecca was just 16. Consumption, the doctor said, though there wasn't much doctoring to be done for it. Her mother had faded through the winter like smoke thinning in cold air. Before she died, Rebecca's mother made her promise something. I know because Rebecca told me years later, when we'd become friends. Her mother took her hand, so thin the bones showed through, and said, "Promise me you'll keep them together. Your father, your brother, your sister. No matter what happens, you keep this family whole." Rebecca promised. She was 16 and her mother was dying, and she would have promised anything. That promise shaped everything that came after. By 1885, keeping that promise was getting harder every day. Thomas Stone, Rebecca's father, had spent 20 years chasing gold in these mountains. Like so many men, he'd come west with dreams bigger than sense. He'd filed claims, worked them until his hands bled, moved on when they played out. Some years he'd found enough color to keep going. Most years he hadn't. The years of breathing rock dust and cold air had ruined his lungs. By that autumn, he couldn't work a full day without doubling over with coughing fits. Sometimes there was blood on the handkerchief he pressed to his mouth. He tried to hide it from the children, but Rebecca saw. She saw everything. Thomas still had a claim up in the hills, but he could barely work it anymore. He'd borrowed money from a bank in Denver to buy equipment, thinking one more try would be the one that paid off. It hadn't. The debt sat there like a stone in his chest, growing heavier. The letters from the bank came regular as clockwork. Rebecca would see her father's face go gray when he opened them. He'd read them by the fire, lips moving silently, then fold them away in the tin box by his bed. He never showed her the letters, but he didn't need to. She could read the worry in every line of his face. Besides Rebecca and her father, there were the two younger children. Sam was 11, all elbows and enthusiasm, still young enough to think poverty was just how life was. He'd go barefoot through the rocks, catching crawdads in the creek, coming home with skinned knees and a grin. And there was Eliza, 14 and starting to understand that other girls had better dresses, more food, fathers who didn't cough blood. Eliza was at that age where shame comes easy and hope comes hard. She'd stopped smiling much. She'd caught Rebecca looking at the ledger one night, seen the numbers that didn't add up, and something had shifted in her eyes. She knew they were poor. She knew it was getting worse. Rebecca did what she could. She kept a garden behind the cabin, coaxing vegetables from thin soil. She mended clothes until there was more patch than original fabric. She walked to town 3 times a week to haul water because their well had gone brackish. She made soup stretch for days and told the children she wasn't hungry when there wasn't enough. And twice a week she came to my store. I remember those visits clearly. Rebecca would push open the door, the bell ringing above her head, and stand for a moment letting her eyes adjust to the dimness. She always wore the same brown dress, faded from sun and washing. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple braid, tied with a ribbon so old the color had worn away to nothing. She'd nod to me, not unfriendly but not chatty either, and move to the dry goods. She'd study the prices like a scholar studying scripture. Flour, salt, beans, sugar, when she could afford it. She'd calculate in her head, lips moving slightly, adding and subtracting. Then she'd bring her choices to the counter and count out coins so slowly and carefully it hurt to watch. Sometimes she'd get to the end and realize she was 2 cents short. She'd stand there deciding what to put back. Usually the sugar, always the sugar. I'd offer credit. She'd refuse. Thomas Stone might owe money to Denver bankers, but Rebecca wouldn't owe money to neighbors. Pride is a hard thing, especially when you've got little else. But there was more to Rebecca than poverty and stubbornness. She had her mother's green eyes and a way of looking at you that was direct and clear. She didn't simper or make herself small like some young women did. When men at the trading post tried to cheat her on weight, she'd point it out calm as anything and wait while they corrected it. When the preacher suggested she might find a husband to ease her burdens, she'd thanked him politely and changed the subject. She read books, too. I'd lend her whatever I had, which wasn't much. Dime novels mostly, sometimes a month-old newspaper from Denver. She'd return them carefully, pages uncrumpled, and thank me like I'd given her gold. Once I asked what she liked about reading. "It makes the cabin feel bigger," she said. "For a little while, I can be somewhere else." I understood that. There's not many ways out of Pine Ridge for a poor girl. Marriage, maybe, if the right man came along. But the men in town were mostly miners and ranch hands, as broke as she was. The few with money were already married or looking for wives with dowries. Rebecca knew it, too. I'd see her sometimes standing outside the church after Sunday service, watching families climb into wagons to head home. Her face would go distant, like she was seeing something the rest of us couldn't. Then she'd collect herself, take Sam and Eliza by the hands, and walk back to the cabin. She never complained, not once in all the times I saw her. But there was something in her eyes that looked like a bird beating against cage bars, something that wanted more than Pine Ridge could give. That September, I noticed the worry in her face getting deeper. The careful way she counted her coins had an edge of desperation. She'd started buying less, making do with even thinner supplies. "Everything all right, Rebecca?" I asked one afternoon. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just being careful, Mrs. Sullivan. Winter's coming." Winter was always coming in these mountains, but I had the sense she meant something more than weather. I was right. The trouble had been building for 2 years, though most of us in town didn't know the details. Thomas Stone had borrowed $300 from the First Bank of Denver. In a city, that might not be much. Up here, it was more money than most folks saw in 5 years. He'd used it to buy proper mining equipment, hire help for a season, shore up a shaft he thought would finally pay out. It hadn't. The vein had played out after a month. The equipment sat rusting behind the cabin. The hired men had moved on. The debt remained. The bank wanted their money. They'd been patient at first, the way banks are when they think they'll get paid. But patience has limits, especially when distance makes collection difficult. The letters had started coming more frequently. The tone had shifted from reminder to warning to threat. By October, Thomas Stone knew he was out of time. I learned this later, from Rebecca herself. But I saw signs of it even then. Thomas came into town less and less. When he did, he looked like a man carrying a weight he couldn't set down. His shoulders bowed. His eyes wouldn't quite meet anyone's. The children didn't know the full extent of it. Thomas had kept it from them as long as he could, the way fathers do when they don't want their children to see them as failures. But in a cabin that small, secrets don't keep well. Rebecca knew. She'd found the letters one day when her father was out. She'd read them all, standing in the weak autumn sunlight that came through the cabin's one good window. She'd read about payment schedules and final notices. She'd read about foreclosure and seizure of assets. She'd read that if payment wasn't made by the end of November, the bank would take everything: the cabin, the claim, the mule, everything they had. She'd put the letters back exactly as she'd found them and never told her father she knew. But the knowledge sat in her chest like a stone, heavy and cold. She started doing calculations in her head. If they sold the mule, they'd get maybe $40. If they sold the mining equipment, another $20 if they were lucky. The cabin wasn't worth much, built as it was from rough timber and hope. Even if they sold everything, it wouldn't be enough. Not nearly enough. And even if it was, they'd have nothing left. Nowhere to live, no way to work. The children would have to be split up, sent to relatives or the poorhouse. The family would shatter like ice under a hammer. She'd promised her mother, keep them together, no matter what. But she couldn't see how. The night everything changed started ordinary enough. It was mid-October, the kind of evening when cold comes down from the mountains like water pouring into a bowl. Rebecca sat by the fire, mending one of Sam's shirts for the 3rd time. The fabric was so worn she could see her fingers through it. Soon there wouldn't be enough good cloth left to patch. Her father sat across from her, staring into the flames. He hadn't spoken much at dinner. Sam and Eliza were already in the loft, settling down for sleep. The cabin was quiet except for the pop and hiss of burning wood. Thomas cleared his throat. "Rebecca." She looked up. His face was gray in the firelight, older than his 52 years. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped his knees. "I need to tell you something," he said. She set down the mending, waited. "The bank," he said. "The debt. I can't pay it. I can't work the claim anymore. Can't hardly breathe most days." He paused, swallowed hard. "They're going to take everything. Unless," he trailed off. Rebecca felt her heartbeat in her throat. "Unless what, Pa?" "Unless you marry," he said, and the words came out like they hurt him. "Marry a man who can provide. Someone who'd pay the debt to have you. I know men in Denver, businessmen, who might—" He couldn't finish. Rebecca's hands had gone cold. "You want to sell me." "No." The word came out sharp, almost angry. "No, girl, I'd never. But I don't see another way. Winter's coming, and the bank's coming, and I'm dying." He said it plain, the thing they had all been dancing around. "I'm dying, Rebecca. Maybe not this year, maybe not next. But soon enough. And when I'm gone, what happens to Sam and Eliza?" She couldn't answer. Her throat had closed. "You're strong," Thomas said, and now his voice was soft, pleading. "Stronger than any of us. You could make a good life, even if the start of it was hard, and the children would be safe, the debt would be paid, they'd have a home." Rebecca stared at the fire. The flames moved and shifted, never staying the same shape twice. She thought about her mother's hand in hers, so light it barely seemed real. "Keep them together. Promise me." "I won't sell you," her father said again. "I'm asking. But I won't force it. If you say no, we'll find another way somehow. Even if—" He didn't say it. Didn't have to. Rebecca nodded slowly. "Let me think, Pa." He nodded back, stood with difficulty, and went to his bed in the corner. Within minutes, his breathing had turned to the rough rattle that passed for sleep these days. Rebecca sat by the fire alone. She thought about being traded like a mule or a mining claim. She thought about men in Denver with smooth hands and calculating eyes. She thought about walking into a marriage built on debt and desperation. But mostly she thought about Sam's laugh and Eliza's quiet sadness and her father's broken cough. She thought about the promise she'd made to a dying woman 7 years ago. Keep them together, no matter what. She sat there until the fire burned down to coals. Then she went to the trunk that held her mother's things. At the very bottom, wrapped in cloth, was her mother's wedding shawl. Rebecca held it to her face, breathing in the faint scent of lavender that still clung to the wool. "I don't know what to do, Mama," she whispered. The shawl had no answers. The cabin was silent. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like distant voices. Rebecca folded the shawl carefully, put it away, and climbed to the loft. She lay awake until dawn, staring at the rough beams above her head, trying to find a path through impossible choices. The knock came 2 nights later. It was full dark, the kind of October darkness that comes early and stays late. Supper was done, such as it was. The children were still awake. Sam playing with carved wooden animals by the hearth, Eliza reading by candlelight, squinting at the small print. The knock wasn't timid or hesitant. It came firm and steady, 3 sharp raps that said the person outside knew exactly why they were there. Thomas Stone went still. Rebecca felt her heartbeat kick up. Nobody came calling after dark unless something was wrong or something was needed. And lately, the only people who came calling wanted money the Stones didn't have. Thomas reached for the old rifle that hung above the door. It was more rust than weapon, but it had presence. He opened the door with the rifle in his hands, not pointing it but not hiding it either. A man stood on the porch. He was tall, broad in the shoulders, wrapped in a worn leather coat that had seen hard use. Dark beard, threads of gray in it, even though he didn't look past 35. His hat was pulled low, but Rebecca could see his eyes in the light spilling from the doorway. Blue eyes, calm and steady, looking past the rifle into the room beyond. "Thomas Stone?" the man said. His voice was deep, quiet, with the kind of calm that came from mountains and long silences. "Who's asking?" Thomas kept the rifle ready. "Name's Caleb Walker. I hold land up in the high country." He nodded toward the mountains. "Word reached me you've got trouble. Thought we might talk." Thomas hesitated. Men didn't just appear out of the dark with offers of help. Not in these mountains. Not without wanting something in return. But the stranger's face was open, patient. He stood there with frost forming on his shoulders, breath misting in the cold air, waiting like he had all the time in the world. Finally, Thomas lowered the rifle and stepped back. "Come in, then." Caleb Walker entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. He was bigger inside the small cabin, his presence filling the space. But he moved carefully, aware of the cramped quarters, taking care not to crowd. Rebecca watched from beside the fire. The stranger's eyes found her, held for a moment. Not in the way some men looked at women, weighing and judging. More like he was confirming something he'd already decided. He looked away, addressed Thomas. "I'll speak plain. I know about the Denver debt. I know the bank's coming for what you have. And I know you're looking for a way to keep your family together. Thomas's jaw tightened. How do you know that? Small town. People talk. Caleb's tone wasn't judgmental, just stating fact. I'm here to make an offer. He paused, glanced at the children. Sam had stopped playing, staring at the stranger with wide eyes. Eliza had set down her book, listening. Maybe the young ones should head up to bed, Caleb said quietly. Thomas nodded. Sam, Eliza, up to the loft. But Pa, Sam started. Now. They went reluctantly, climbing the ladder, but staying at the top, peering down through the gaps in the floorboards. Thomas didn't chase them further. In a cabin this size, privacy was more idea than reality. Caleb waited until they'd settled. Then he looked at Rebecca directly. Miss Stone, he said, I'm looking for a wife. The words hung in the cold air. Rebecca felt the floor shift under her feet, though she hadn't moved. I'm not a rich man, Caleb continued. Not by Denver standards, but I've got steady work, a place of my own up in the high range. I've got strong hands and I know how to provide. He paused. If you'd consent to marry me, I'd settle your father's debt in Denver. All of it. And I'd see to it there's enough food and firewood to keep this family through the winter and beyond. Rebecca found her voice. Why? Why what? Why me? Why this? She gestured at the cabin, the poverty written in every corner. You could find a wife anywhere. Why come to a stranger's door in the dark? Something that might have been respect flickered in Caleb's eyes. Fair question. I've been watching you in town, seen you at the trading post, standing your ground when the scales weren't fair. Seen you haul water and carry flour and keep moving when other folks would have quit. I need a partner, Miss Stone, not a decoration. Someone who knows how to work and won't break when things get hard. You've been watching me. Rebecca's voice was flat. I have. And I know how that sounds, but I'm not a man who makes decisions light. Marriage is serious business. I wanted to see what kind of person you were before I came asking. He held her gaze. I liked what I saw. Thomas spoke up, voice rough. What do you really want, Walker? Nobody makes an offer like this without wanting something. I want what I said, a wife who'll stand beside me, someone real. Caleb's voice was steady. I'm tired of women who see through me looking for something I'm not. Up in the high country, life is hard. Beautiful, but hard. I need someone who understands that. Who won't run when the snow comes deep or the work gets heavy. He turned back to Rebecca. I won't lie and say it's easy living. The winters are long, and the nearest neighbor is 10 miles off. But you'd have a home. You'd have my protection and my name. And I give you my word, I'm not a cruel man. Rebecca studied him. His hands were calloused, scarred from work. His coat was patched, but the patches were neat, done with care. His boots were worn but solid. Everything about him spoke of a man who worked with his hands and valued durability over flash. I'd need time, she said slowly, to think about it. Caleb nodded. That's right and proper. I'll be in town 3 more days staying at the boarding house. You can send word whenever you decide. Or if you decide not to, that's your choice, and I'll respect it. He put his hat back on, preparing to leave. Then he paused. One more thing. If you say yes, the choice will be yours. I won't drag you away, and I won't force anything. You'd come willing or not at all. He looked at Thomas. No offense meant, but I'm asking her, not you. With that, he stepped out into the night. The door closed behind him, and the cabin felt smaller, quieter, like all the air had gone with him. Thomas sank into his chair. Rebecca stood by the fire, staring at the flames. From the loft, Sam's whisper floated down. Who was that? Hush, Eliza whispered back. Rebecca touched the pocket of her dress where her mother's ribbon lay folded, the one she'd worn in her hair the day she died. Keep them together, no matter what. The promise echoed in her head like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. By morning, Pine Ridge was buzzing. News traveled fast in a small town, especially news this strange. A mountain man nobody knew, making an offer of marriage to Thomas Stone's daughter? The gossip spread like fire through dry grass. I heard 3 different versions before noon. One said Caleb Walker was an outlaw hiding from the law. Another said he'd killed his first wife and was looking for a replacement. A third claimed he was simple-minded and no decent woman would have him. None of it was true, but truth doesn't matter much when people want something to talk about. Rebecca came to my store that morning, earlier than usual. The bell rang, and she stepped inside, moving quickly like she wanted to get off the street. Her face was pale, eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said quietly, "have you heard?" "I've heard all kinds of things." I came around the counter. "Why don't you tell me what's true?" She did. Standing there in my store with morning light coming through the dusty windows, she told me about Caleb Walker's offer, about the debt and the impossible choice, and her father's broken face. "What should I do?" she asked, and her voice cracked on the last word. I looked at this young woman who'd been forced to grow up too fast, who'd raised her siblings and nursed her dying mother and kept a family together through sheer stubborn will, who'd never had the chance to be young or foolish or free. "I can't tell you that, child," I said gently. "Nobody can tell you that but your own heart." "My heart doesn't know." She wiped at her eyes, angry at herself for the tears. "I don't want to be sold like property, but I don't see another way." "Is he a good man, this Caleb Walker?" "I don't know. I only met him once. He seemed—" She paused, searching for words. "Honest, respectful, but I don't know him." "Do you have to decide right now?" "He's leaving in 3 days, and the bank—" She didn't finish. Didn't need to. I went to the shelf where I kept the books and pulled down one I'd been saving. It was a small thing, a collection of poetry someone had left behind years ago. I pressed it into Rebecca's hands. "Take this. Read it tonight. Think about what you want, not just what you have to do. Then decide." She looked down at the book, then back at me. "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan." After she left, I stood at the window watching her walk down the street. Other women watched too, from doorways and windows. Some looked at her with pity, others with judgment, a few with relief that it wasn't their daughter in Rebecca's shoes. I wanted to yell at all of them, to tell them that girl had more courage in her little finger than most folks managed in a lifetime. But I didn't. I just watched her go, straight-backed and proud even with the whole town's eyes on her. That afternoon, Thomas Stone came in. He bought whiskey, which wasn't like him, paid for it with coins I suspected he couldn't spare. "She shouldn't have to do this," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "It's my failure putting her in this position." "Life puts us in positions," I said. "Failure is when we stop trying to do right by the people we love." "You're still trying, Thomas." He nodded, but his hands shook as he took the bottle. Her mother would hate me for this. Her mother would understand. She made Rebecca promise to keep the family together. That's what Rebecca's trying to do. He left without another word, shoulders bent, like he was carrying the whole mountain range on his back. Over the next 2 days, I watched Pine Ridge's reaction to the situation. The gossip got wilder. Some said Caleb Walker was rich as Midas, but pretending poverty to test Rebecca. Others said he was dangerous, that Rebecca would disappear into the mountains, never to be seen again. The truth was simpler and sadder. A man needed a wife. A woman needed to save her family. Neither of them was getting a fairy tale, just survival, dressed up in wedding clothes. I saw Caleb around town during those days. He kept to himself mostly, staying at the boarding house, taking meals alone, but I noticed things about him. The way he treated his horses with gentle care, how he thanked the serving girl at the dining room and left her extra coins. The respect in his voice when he spoke to anyone, regardless of their station. He didn't look like a cruel man, but then again, sometimes the cruelest men looked the kindest. On the third morning, I saw Rebecca walking toward the boarding house. She moved slowly, like her feet were heavy. She wore her best dress, which wasn't saying much, and had her hair pinned up neat. I knew what she was going to say before she said it. You could see it in the set of her shoulders and the resigned determination in her face. She was going to say yes, because that's what you did when you'd made a promise to a dying mother, and there was no other way to keep it. The creditors arrived the next afternoon. 2 men on clean horses, wearing city suits that had no business in these mountains. They rode straight to the stone cabin like they'd been there before, which they probably had. I heard about it from Mrs. Chen, who lived close enough to see. She came to the store within the hour, breathless with news. "They've come to collect," she said. Went right to Thomas's door with papers and hard faces. Rebecca was out by the garden when they arrived. I saw her drop the water bucket and run inside. I closed the store early, something I rarely did, and walked toward the edge of town. I didn't go all the way to the cabin. That would have been intruding, but I got close enough to see. The two men stood in the yard, looking around like they were already calculating what everything was worth. One of them held papers, pointing at different things. The cabin, the mule in the small corral, the rusted mining equipment behind the shed. Through the open door I could see Rebecca standing beside her father. Thomas was in his chair, bent over like someone had punched him in the stomach. His face had gone gray. The men's voices carried on the cold air, though I couldn't make out words. But I didn't need to. I knew what they were saying. Pay up or lose everything. The same message men with money have been giving men without money since the world began. After about 20 minutes, the creditors mounted their horses and rode off. They didn't look satisfied, but they didn't look angry either, just businesslike, like they'd delivered a message, and that was that. I waited until they were well gone, then walked to the cabin. The door was still open. Inside, Thomas sat in his chair, papers scattered on the floor around him. Rebecca knelt beside him, one hand on his shoulder. Sam and Eliza were in the loft again, faces pressed to the gaps, watching everything. "Thomas?" I called from the doorway. He looked up. His eyes were wet. "They're taking it all, Martha. End of the month. Everything." Rebecca's face was like stone. "No, they're not." Her father looked at her. "Rebecca?" "I told Mr. Walker yes," she said quietly. "This morning. He's settling the debt tomorrow. They can't take anything if the debt's paid." Thomas made a sound like something breaking inside him. "Oh, girl, I'm so sorry. I'm so damn sorry." "Don't be, Pa." Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. "This is my choice." It wasn't, not really. But saying it made it easier to bear. I stepped inside. "When's the wedding?" Rebecca stood, wiping her hands on her dress like she was wiping away the whole situation. "Day after tomorrow. Mr. Walker has a minister coming from the next town over, says it'll be legal and proper. 2 days. 2 days to prepare for a marriage to a stranger. 2 days to pack up your life and walk away from everything you'd ever known." I wanted to tell her not to do it. Wanted to say we'd find another way, that the town would help. But I'd lived in Pine Ridge long enough to know how hollow those promises would be. People meant well, but when push came to shove, folks had their own troubles. $300 might as well have been $3,000. "I'll help you get ready," I said instead. Rebecca nodded, grateful for something practical to hold on to. That evening, I brought fabric from my store. Not much, just enough for a simple dress. It wasn't fancy, but it was new cloth, clean and whole. Rebecca looked at it like I'd brought her silk and pearls. "Mrs. Sullivan, I can't." "You can, and you will. Every bride deserves something new." We sat up late that night, Rebecca and I, cutting and stitching by lamplight. Eliza helped, her young fingers nimble with the needle. We didn't talk much. Sometimes there's nothing to say that makes hard things easier. The dress came together simple and clean. We used thread the color of forest green because Rebecca said it reminded her of the pines, of home, of something that would still be here after she was gone. When it was done, Rebecca held it up. In the lamplight, it looked almost beautiful. She touched the fabric gently, like it might disappear if she pressed too hard. "Thank you," she whispered. I hugged her then, this girl I'd watched grow up too fast. "You're stronger than you know, Rebecca Stone. Don't you forget that." She nodded against my shoulder, and I felt her tears soaking through my dress. The wedding took place on a cold October morning with clouds hanging low over the mountains. The minister was a thin man who'd ridden in from 2 towns over. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd rather be anywhere else. Can't say I blamed him. There's nothing joyful about a wedding built on desperation. They held it outside the cabin because there wasn't room inside for everyone. And despite everything, people came. Curiosity, mostly. A few came out of genuine care for the family. Some came to judge. You could see it in their faces. Rebecca wore the dress we'd made. Her hair was pinned up with her mother's ribbon woven through it. She looked older than 23. She looked like someone going to a funeral instead of a wedding. Caleb Walker stood waiting in clean clothes that were still worn from use. He'd shaved, trimmed his beard neat. When Rebecca approached, he didn't smile, but his eyes were kind. He held out his hand to help her over a rough patch of ground. Thomas Stone gave his daughter away, though it looked like it killed him to do it. His hand shook when he placed Rebecca's in Caleb's. Tears ran down his weathered face, and he didn't bother wiping them away. Sam and Eliza stood close together, holding hands. Sam looked confused. Eliza looked angry and lost and scared all at once. The minister rushed through the ceremony like he wanted to get it over with. The words that should mean something, love, honor, cherish, sounded hollow in the cold air. Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper when she said, "I do." Caleb's was steady and clear. They were pronounced man and wife. Caleb didn't kiss her, just nodded, respectful, like they'd concluded business instead of joined their lives. After, there was food. Not much, but what the neighbors could spare. Bread and cheese and a cake Mrs. Chen had made. People ate quickly, talked in low voices, then made excuses to leave. Within an hour, only family remained. And me, because Rebecca had asked me to stay. Caleb had a wagon waiting, loaded with supplies. 2 strong horses stood in harness, their breath steaming in the cold. He'd come prepared to leave immediately. Rebecca went into the cabin one last time. I followed her. She moved through the small space slowly, touching things. The rough table where they'd eaten thousands of meals, the chair where her mother had sat, the shelf that held their few books. She climbed to the loft and stood there for a long moment, looking at the space where she'd slept her whole life. Then she came down, carrying a small bundle. Everything she owned fit in a cloth bag. Outside, Thomas waited with the younger children. Caleb stood by the wagon, giving them space. Rebecca hugged Sam first. He clung to her, crying, "Don't go, Becca. Please don't go." "I have to, sweet boy, but I'll come back to visit, I promise." She held Eliza next. Her sister was stiff at first, then collapsed against her. "I hate this," Eliza whispered. "I hate that you have to leave." "I know, I hate it too." Rebecca pulled back, looked her sister in the eyes. "But you take care of Pa and Sam, you hear me? You're strong enough. You're stronger than you think." Finally, she turned to her father. Thomas Stone looked like a man watching his heart walk away. "Pa?" Rebecca's voice broke. "Don't," he said. "Don't say goodbye like it's forever. It's not forever. I'll write. And Mr. Walker says you can visit when the snow clears." Thomas pulled her into his arms. For a moment they just stood there, father and daughter, holding on to each other like they could stop time through sheer will. "Your mother would be proud of you," Thomas whispered. "God forgive me, but she would be proud." Rebecca was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "I'm keeping them together, Pa. Like I promised Mama, I'm keeping you all together." "I know, girl, I know." Caleb approached quietly. "We should go. Want to make the first way station before dark." Rebecca nodded, wiping her face. She let her father help her onto the wagon seat. Caleb climbed up beside her, took the reins. I stepped forward and pressed something into Rebecca's hands, the book of poetry, wrapped in cloth. "For the quiet moments," I said. She looked at me with eyes full of tears and gratitude. "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan, for everything. Be brave, child, and remember, you're worth more than you know." Caleb clicked to the horses. The wagon lurched forward, wheels creaking on the frozen dirt. I watched them go, this stranger and the girl I'd known since she was small. The wagon rolled down the path, picking up speed. Rebecca looked back once, raising her hand. Sam and Eliza waved frantically. Thomas just stood there, one hand raised, watching until the wagon was out of sight. Even after it disappeared around the bend, he stood there. Like if he waited long enough, it might come back. But it didn't come back. The yard went quiet except for the wind in the pines. Sam was crying openly now. Eliza had her arm around him, her own face wet with tears. Thomas sank onto the porch steps like his legs wouldn't hold him anymore. I stood there with them as the sun climbed higher and the day stretched out empty and strange. Rebecca was gone. The cabin felt smaller, like something vital had been carved out of it. Later, when I was walking back to town, I saw the wagon in the distance. It was just a small shape against the vast mountains, climbing the trail that led to the high country. Rebecca sat beside her new husband, heading toward a life she'd never chosen, in a place she'd never seen, with a man she didn't know. But she sat straight. Even from that distance I could see she didn't slouch or bow her head. She sat like a woman who'd made a hard choice and would live with it, come what may. That's when I knew Rebecca Stone was going to be all right. Maybe not happy, not right away, but all right. Because she had something most people never find, the kind of strength that doesn't come from having choices, but from making the best of the choices you don't have. I pause in my telling, and the journalist looks up from his frantic note-taking. That's remarkable, he says. She saved her family by sacrificing herself. I shake my head. That's not how she saw it. She didn't think she was sacrificing. She thought she was doing what needed to be done. But to marry a stranger, we all take risks when we love people. I stand, my old bones creaking. Coffee's cold, I'll make fresh. While I fuss with the pot, the journalist flips through his notes. So she left with Caleb Walker, heading into the mountains. Then what happened? I smile, pouring water into the pot. Then the real story started. Because leaving Pine Ridge was just the beginning. Rebecca had no idea what she was walking into. None of us did. But you found out? Eventually. Some of it she told me herself, years later. Some I pieced together from other folks. And some, I pause, remembering. Some you could just see in her face when she came back changed. The journalist leans forward, eager. Changed how? I settle back into my chair, cradling the warm cup. Outside, the afternoon sun is slanting through the mountains, painting everything gold. That first wagon ride took 3 days, I say. 3 days climbing into country most folks from Pine Ridge had never seen. Rebecca thought she was marrying a poor mountain man who'd take her to a cabin somewhere. She had no idea what was waiting at the end of that trail. What was waiting? I take a sip of coffee, letting the suspense build. The journalist deserves that much. Stories should make you lean in, make you wait, make you wonder. Winter Ridge, I finally say. A place that would change everything Rebecca thought she knew about Caleb Walker, about her new life, and about what she was truly capable of. Tell me, he urges. I settle deeper into my chair and begin the next part of the story. But that's for another telling, another time. Right now, I want him to sit with this part. The choice, the sacrifice. The moment when a young woman walked away from everything she knew because keeping a promise mattered more than keeping herself comfortable. That's the part people forget when they talk about Rebecca Winters, the legend. They forget she started as Rebecca Stone, the girl who had no good choices and chose anyway. They forget that courage isn't about having options. It's about what you do when all your options are hard and you pick one anyway. The journalist is still waiting, pencil poised. That's where we'll stop for today, I tell him. Come back tomorrow. There's plenty more to tell, but some stories need to breathe between tellings. He looks disappointed but nods. Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan. This is better than anything I expected. After he leaves, I sit alone in my store as the light fades. I think about Rebecca on that wagon, rolling away from everything familiar. I think about the choice she made and what it cost her. But I also think about what came after. The strength she found, the battle she won, the life she built from nothing but determination and will. That's the story worth telling. Not the fairy tale the newspapers want, but the truth about a woman who refused to be broken by circumstances that should have broken her. Outside, the mountains turn purple in the fading light. Somewhere up there, in a hidden valley most folks will never see, Rebecca Winters is living the life she fought for. And tomorrow I'll tell the journalist about how she got there. But tonight, I'm content to sit with the beginning, with the girl who said yes when every part of her wanted to say no, with the promise made to a dying mother and kept no matter the cost. That's enough story for one day. The journalist returns the next morning with fresh coffee and an eagerness that reminds me of a hunting dog on a scent. "You left off with Rebecca heading into the mountains," he says, settling into the chair across from me. "What happened on that journey?" I pour us both coffee from the pot I'd prepared. Outside, morning mist hangs over Pine Ridge, just like it did that October day 10 years ago when Rebecca left. "The trail to the high country isn't easy," I begin. 3 days of climbing, sometimes on paths so narrow a wagon wheel hung over empty air. Most women would have been terrified, but Rebecca had something else on her mind. What's that? Trying to figure out who she'd just married. The first day passed in near silence. Rebecca sat on the wagon seat beside Caleb, her small bundle of belongings at her feet, watching Pine Ridge fall away below them. The trail climbed steadily, switchbacking up the slope. Every turn took her farther from everything she'd ever known. She told me later that her chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out her insides and left just the shell. She kept thinking about Sam's tears, and Eliza's anger, and her father's broken face. Kept thinking that maybe she should have fought harder, found another way, refused to be traded like property no matter how polite the transaction. But she'd made her choice. The only thing left was to live with it. Caleb didn't push conversation. He drove the team with steady hands, eyes always scanning the trail ahead, the sky above, the forest on either side. A man used to watching, used to reading the land for signs of weather or danger or opportunity. Around midday, he pulled the wagon to a stop beside a narrow creek. The horses needed water and rest. So did Rebecca, though she wouldn't have asked. "There's bread and cheese in the pack," Caleb said, climbing down. "Help yourself." Rebecca descended carefully, her legs stiff from sitting. The air was thinner up here, each breath a little harder to pull in. Pine scent surrounded them, sharp and clean. The creek ran clear over smooth stones, so cold it made her teeth ache when she cupped her hands to drink. Caleb tended the horses first. She watched him work, the way he checked their hooves, ran his hands along their legs looking for injury, spoke to them in low tones that seemed to calm them. These weren't cheap horses. She'd seen enough livestock to know quality when it stood in front of her. The leather harness was old but well maintained. Every buckle sound, every strap properly adjusted. Details that didn't quite fit a poor mountain man. They ate in silence, sitting on opposite sides of the wagon. The bread was good, fresh baked, better than what Rebecca had been able to afford in months. The cheese was sharp and rich. She forced herself to eat slowly, though hunger pulled at her. "How far is your place?" she finally asked. 2 more days at this pace." Caleb wrapped the remaining food carefully. "We'll make the halfway station before dark. There's a cabin there, belongs to a man named Dutch. He keeps it open for travelers." "You've made this trip often?" "Often enough." She wanted to ask more. Where did he go? What business took him to Pine Ridge? Why did a mountain man need to visit town so regularly? But she held her tongue. They were married, but still strangers. Some questions needed time. They continued climbing. The trail grew steeper, rockier. Trees pressed close on both sides, dark pines that blocked the sun and made the air cool even in afternoon. Caleb navigated obstacles with practiced ease, guiding the horses around boulders, across narrow wooden bridges that creaked under the wagon's weight. Rebecca noticed more details as the day wore on. His coat was patched, yes, but the patches were neat, done with skill. His boots were worn but made of good leather, the kind that lasted. And the way he handled the team, that took experience, the kind you didn't get from desperation, but from years of working with horses. Who was this man she'd married? Late afternoon brought clouds, heavy and gray, rolling in from the peaks above. The temperature dropped. Rebecca pulled her thin shawl tighter, wishing she'd thought to bring something warmer. Without a word, Caleb reached behind the seat and pulled out a thick wool blanket. He handed it to her. "Storm's coming," he said. "We'll beat it to the station, but you'll want that." The blanket was warm, well made. Rebecca wrapped it around her shoulders, grateful despite herself. "Thank you." He nodded, attention back on the trail. They reached the halfway station just as the first drops of rain began to fall. The cabin was small but solid, smoke rising from its chimney. A man stepped out onto the porch, tall, graying, with a weathered face that had seen hard years. "Caleb," he called. "Thought that might be you. Come on in before this storm hits proper." Caleb pulled the wagon under a lean-to shelter, unhitched the horses, and led them to a small barn. Rebecca climbed down, suddenly uncertain. The man on the porch was studying her with open curiosity. "You must be the bride," he said. "Dutch Morrison. This is my place, such as it is. Come in, come in. Got stew on and it's warm by the fire." Inside, the cabin was simple but clean. A fire roared in the stone hearth. The smell of cooking meat and vegetables made Rebecca's stomach growl despite the bread and cheese earlier. Caleb came in, brushing rain from his shoulders. "Dutch, this is my wife, Rebecca." The word sounded strange. Wife, like it belonged to someone else. Dutch shook her hand with surprising gentleness for such a rough-looking man. "Pleased to meet you, ma'am. Any wife of Caleb's is welcome at my fire." Over stew and fresh biscuits, Dutch and Caleb talked, mostly about the trail, weather, condition of various passes. Rebecca listened, trying to learn what she could. "Railroad's been active," Dutch said at one point. "Had surveyors through here last month, measuring and marking. They're serious about that route through the high valley." Caleb's jaw tightened. "They can be serious all they want. The land's not for sale." "They're offering good money, I hear." "Some things aren't about money." Dutch glanced at Rebecca, then back to Caleb. "Fair enough. Your pa felt the same way." Rebecca's ears perked up. Caleb's father, this was the first she'd heard anyone mention him. "How's the old place?" Dutch asked. "Haven't been up that way in a year?" "Standing strong, always does." Caleb's voice was careful, guarded. Dutch seemed to sense he was on delicate ground. He changed the subject, asked Rebecca about Pine Ridge, her family. She answered briefly, still processing what she'd heard. "The land's not for sale." Your pa. The old place. Small pieces of a puzzle she didn't yet understand. After supper, Dutch showed them to a small room at the back of the cabin. One bed, a washstand, a chair. He bid them good night and closed the door. Rebecca stood frozen. She'd known this moment would come, but thinking about it and facing it were different things. She was married to this man. This was a wedding night after a fashion. Caleb seemed to sense her tension. He took the blanket from the wagon, spread it on the floor. "You take the bed," he said quietly. "I'll sleep here." "You don't have to." "I do." He looked at her directly. "I know this isn't what you wanted. I'm not going to make it harder. We're married in law and name, but the rest, that'll come when you're ready, if you're ever ready. No pressure, no expectations." Rebecca felt something in her chest loosen slightly. "Thank you." He nodded, turned away to give her privacy. She changed into her nightdress behind the screen of her shawl, climbed into the bed. It was the first time in her life she'd slept in a bed alone. At home, she'd always shared with Eliza, their bodies pressed together for warmth. Now there was just space, cold and empty and strange. She lay awake listening to the rain hammer the roof, listened to Caleb's breathing slow and deepen as he fell asleep on the floor. Wondered what her family was doing right now, whether Sam had cried himself to sleep, whether Eliza was angry at her, whether her father was sitting by the fire, drowning his guilt in the whiskey he couldn't afford. Keep them together, no matter what. She'd kept her promise. So why did it feel like she'd broken something instead? The second day dawned cold and clear. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. Water dripped from pine branches, catching the early light like diamonds. The air smelled of wet earth and new snow from the higher peaks. They left Dutch's station after a breakfast of eggs and bacon. Dutch pressed extra food on them, wouldn't take no for an answer. As they pulled away, he called out to Caleb, "You take care of her, you hear? She's got grit, I can see it. But grit needs tending, same as anything else." Caleb promised he would. The trail grew steeper. Sometimes Rebecca had to get down and walk beside the wagon to ease the load on the horses. Her feet hurt in her worn boots, but she didn't complain. Caleb walked beside her during these stretches, leading the team by hand, patient with the slow pace. Around noon, they stopped to rest the horses. Rebecca sat on a fallen log, while Caleb checked the wheels, the harness, everything that needed checking. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He looked up. "Of course. Dutch called you Caleb, but you said your name was Caleb Walker." "That's right. He knew your father, talked about the old place like it was something more than a cabin." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he came and sat on the log beside her, not too close, but not distant either. "My full name is Caleb Winters Walker," he said carefully. "Walker was my mother's maiden name. I use it sometimes when I travel." "Why?" "Because Winters is complicated." Rebecca waited. The forest around them was quiet except for birds and the distant rush of water. "My father built a timber business," Caleb continued. "Started from nothing, worked himself half to death for 30 years. When he died 2 years back, the business passed to me, along with the land, the responsibilities, all of it." Rebecca's heart was beating faster. "How big a business?" "Big enough that people know the name, Winters Timber." He looked at her. "I'm not a poor man, Rebecca. I'm sorry I let you think I was." The words hit her like cold water. She stood up, suddenly needing distance. "You let me think," she couldn't finish. Anger and confusion, and something else she couldn't name, swirled in her chest. "I know." He stood too, hands open, placating. "I know how it looks, but I need you to understand why. Why you lied." "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything." He took a breath. "In Denver, in the cities, people know my name, know I've got money and land. And every woman who comes near me, I have to wonder, does she see me or does she see what I can give her? So you tested me," Rebecca's voice was bitter, "dressed like a poor man, and watched me struggle with pennies at the trading post. Watched me choose between flour and sugar because I couldn't afford both. And you knew the whole time you could have what? Bought your affection? Proved you right that rich men think poor women are for sale?" His voice had an edge now. "I wanted you to know me first. The man, not the money." "I didn't know you at all. I still don't." She was shaking, whether from cold or anger she couldn't tell. "I married a stranger because my family was drowning in debt. You think I care if that stranger is poor or rich. Either way, I'm still the girl who got traded to save her father's claim." The words hung in the cold air between them. Caleb's face went pale. "Is that how you see it? That I bought you? Didn't you?" Rebecca wrapped her arms around herself. $300 to the bank, provisions for my family. What else would you call it?" "I'd call it giving you a choice you wouldn't have had otherwise." His voice was quiet but firm. "Yes, I paid the debt, but I didn't do it to own you. I did it because your family needed help and I could provide it. And I did it because I hoped, maybe foolishly, that you might choose to stay for more than just obligation." Rebecca turned away, looking at the mountains rising above them. Everything in her life had changed in the span of a week, and now she was learning it was built on foundations she'd misunderstood completely. "Where are we going?" she asked finally. "What's waiting at the end of this trail?" "Home," Caleb said. "My home. Our home, if you'll have it." "What kind of home does a timber baron have hidden in the mountains?" "One I think you'll have opinions about." There was something that might have been humor in his voice. "You seem to have opinions about most things." Despite everything, Rebecca felt a small, unwilling smile tug at her mouth. "Is that a problem?" "No," he said it firmly. "No, it's one of the things I—" He stopped, seemed to reconsider. "It's one of the reasons I thought you'd be a good partner. I don't need someone who agrees with everything I say. I need someone who'll tell me when I'm wrong. Partner, not wife, not property. Partner." Rebecca turned back to face him. I'm still angry you didn't tell me. That's fair. And I don't know if I can trust you. Also fair. He met her eyes. I'm hoping time will help with that. What if it doesn't? Then at least your family is safe and you have a roof over your head. That's more than you had before. He paused. But I'm hoping for more than that. I'm hoping we can build something real. Rebecca studied him. His face was open, earnest. Whatever else he'd hidden, this seemed true. He genuinely wanted this to be more than a transaction. She didn't know if that made it better or worse. We should keep moving, she said finally. You said we'd make good distance today. Caleb nodded, accepting the change of subject. They climbed back onto the wagon and continued up the trail, but something had shifted between them. The silence wasn't quite so cold. And when Rebecca stumbled over a rough patch later that afternoon, Caleb's hand shot out to steady her without hesitation, then withdrew just as quickly when she was stable. Small gestures, careful respect, the tentative beginning of something that might eventually become trust. They made camp that night beside a high mountain stream. The trail had climbed above the tree line into a landscape of rock and thin grass and sky that seemed to go on forever. Caleb said the next station was still hours away, too far to reach before dark, so they'd sleep under the stars. He built a fire with the easy efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Rebecca watched him arrange stones, select wood, coax flame from spark. Within minutes, warmth pushed back the biting cold. They ate dried meat and hard bread, supplemented by the food Dutch had given them. The stars came out, more than Rebecca had ever seen. Living in the valley, she'd never realized how many stars there were. Up here, they crowded the sky like scattered diamonds. It's beautiful, she said softly. Caleb followed her gaze upward. First time this high? First time out of the valley, really. Except once when I was small, my mother took me to Denver. I barely remember it. What do you remember? Rebecca thought back. Noise, so much noise, people and wagons and bells ringing, buildings so tall they blocked the sun. I held my mother's hand so tight I thought I'd break her fingers. I was terrified I'd get lost. Did you like it, the city? I don't know, I was too scared to have an opinion. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. My mother bought me peppermint candy, first time I'd ever had any. I made it last a whole week, just tiny licks each day. Caleb smiled. Sounds like you. What does? Making things last. Being careful with what you have. Rebecca wasn't sure if that was a compliment or an observation. Maybe both. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire. Finally, Caleb spoke. My father used to bring me up here when I was young, he said. Before the business got big, when it was just him and a few men cutting selective timber. He'd show me the forest, teach me about different trees, how to read the land. He said every mountain had a story if you knew how to listen. What happened to him? Heart gave out. Caleb's voice was flat, controlled. He worked too hard for too long. Always one more contract, one more expansion. He wanted to leave something that would last. Wanted to prove that an immigrant could build something permanent in this country. He was an immigrant? From Germany. Came over when he was 16 with nothing but the clothes on his back and a saw he'd stolen from his father. Learned English in lumber camps, worked his way up, saved every penny. By the time he was 30, he had his own operation. Caleb poked at the fire with a stick. He died at 52, 2 years of enjoying what he'd built, then gone. Rebecca heard the pain under the carefully controlled words. I'm sorry. He left me everything, the business, the land, all of it, along with a letter that said, he paused, throat working, don't make my mistakes. Build something that matters, but don't forget to live while you're building it. Is that why you went looking for a wife? Because he told you to live? Partly. Caleb looked at her across the fire. And partly because I was tired of being alone. The business is successful, but it's hollow when there's no one to share it with. Every woman in Denver wanted to marry Caleb Winters, the timber baron. But I wanted someone who could love Caleb Walker, the man. Those aren't separate people. Aren't they? He shook his head. You tell me. If I'd come to your cabin in a fine suit riding a blooded horse, offering money directly, Would you have seen me? Or just another rich man throwing coins at a problem? Rebecca wanted to argue, but honesty made her pause. She would have been suspicious, would have wondered what he really wanted, what he was hiding, would have felt even more like property being purchased. Maybe you're right, she admitted quietly. Maybe I needed to see you without all of that first. And now that you know? Now I'm angry you didn't tell me, and confused about what's real and what was performance, and scared because I signed my life over to someone I don't understand. She met his eyes. But I'm trying to see why you did it. That doesn't mean I forgive it yet. That's more than I have a right to expect. He stood, began banking the fire. You should sleep. Tomorrow's another hard climb. They made their beds on opposite sides of the fire. Caleb gave her both blankets, said he'd slept in worse cold. Rebecca wanted to argue but was too tired to fight. She lay looking at the stars, listening to the stream rush past, to Caleb's breathing even out on the other side of the dying fire. Thought about the man she'd married and the secrets he still held, about the home waiting at the end of this trail and what it would mean for her future. Keep them together, her mother's voice echoed in her mind. She was keeping them together. But in doing so, she'd tied herself to a man and a life she didn't yet understand. Tomorrow would bring answers, Caleb had said. Tomorrow she'd see what being Mrs. Caleb Winters really meant. She wasn't sure she was ready, but ready or not, tomorrow was coming. I paused to refill our coffee cups. The journalist has filled several pages with notes, his hand cramping from writing so fast. She must have been terrified, he says. Terrified, angry, confused. I settled back into my chair. But also, and this is important, she was paying attention. Every detail, every inconsistency. Rebecca was poor, not stupid. She was starting to piece together that the man she'd married wasn't what he'd seemed. Did she consider running? Where would she run to? Back to Pine Ridge and a family that couldn't feed her? Forward into unknown mountains with no supplies? I shake my head. Rebecca was practical. She'd made her choice. Now she had to live with it. But the third day, that's when everything changed? Everything changed. I take a sip of coffee, remembering what Rebecca told me years later about that morning, the way her breath caught when the hidden valley first came into view. Tell me, the journalist urges. I smile. Patience. Some revelations need proper setup. The third morning broke cold and crystalline. Rebecca woke with frost on her blanket, her breath misting in the thin air. Caleb already had the fire rebuilt, coffee brewing in a battered pot. He handed her a cup without speaking, and she wrapped her hands around it, grateful for the warmth. They ate quickly and broke camp. The trail ahead was the steepest yet, climbing toward a pass between two massive peaks. Caleb said once they crossed the pass, they'd see their destination. The climb took most of the morning. The horses strained against the grade, hooves slipping occasionally on loose rock. More than once, Caleb had to get down and steady the wagon while Rebecca led the team. Her lungs burned with the effort of breathing thin air. Her legs ached from the constant incline. But the landscape was breathtaking. They'd climbed above the pine forests into a world of rock and sky. Eagles circled overhead, their cries sharp and lonely. Snowfields gleamed on distant peaks. The world felt both vast and intimate, like they were the only people who'd ever been here. Around midday they reached the pass, the trail leveled out, running between two walls of stone. Caleb stopped the wagon. "Before we go through," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Rebecca's heart kicked up. "What?" "What you're about to see. It's going to be different from what you expected. A lot different." He turned to face her fully. "And I know I should have told you before, should have prepared you, but I was afraid if I described it, you wouldn't believe me. Or you'd think I was boasting, or worse, you'd think I was trying to buy your approval." "Caleb," Rebecca's voice was tight, "what are we about to see?" He didn't answer directly, just clicked to the horses and guided them forward through the pass. The trail curved around a cluster of twisted pines, and then the world opened up. Below them, cupped by steep slopes and dark timber, lay a hidden valley. wide and green even this late in the year, with a river cutting through its center like a silver ribbon. Meadows still showed patches of grass. Aspen groves clustered in the low spots, their leaves gone but the white trunks bright against the dark pines. It was beautiful. More than beautiful. It was pristine, untouched, like a secret the mountains had kept for themselves. But that wasn't what made Rebecca's breath catch. In the center of the valley, commanding the best view of the river, rose a massive lodge built of heavy logs and stone. 3 stories tall with a steep roof to shed snow. Broad porches wrapped around it on 2 levels. Tall windows caught the afternoon sun and threw it back in flashes of gold. Smoke lifted from multiple chimneys. Fences and corrals spread out around it in neat lines. Barns, smaller buildings, a covered structure that might have been a sawmill. And everywhere, the signs of care and money. Not ostentatious wealth, but solid prosperity. This wasn't a cabin. It wasn't even a ranch house. It was an estate. Rebecca couldn't find words. Her mind struggled to reconcile what she was seeing with the worn coat, the patched wagon, the simple food they'd eaten for 3 days. "This?" she finally managed, voice shaking. "This is your home?" "Winter Ridge," Caleb said quietly. "The valley is Winter Ridge. The lodge is Winter House. It's—" He paused. "It's where I live, where we'll live, if you're willing." The wagon started down the winding track that descended into the valley. Rebecca gripped the seat, feeling like the ground had dropped out from under her. "You said you weren't rich," she said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "I said I wasn't rich by Denver standards. I said I had steady work and a place of my own." He glanced at her. Both true, just not complete. Not complete. Rebecca laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's not a cabin. That's not a mountain man's simple holding. I don't even know what that is. It's a family home. My father built it over 20 years, added to it as the business grew. He wanted something that would last, that would stand against the winters." Caleb's voice was careful. "It's probably too big for 2 people, but he dreamed of grandchildren, of family gatherings. He wanted something that felt permanent." As they descended, Rebecca could see more details. The fences were all in good repair. The barns had fresh paint. Men worked in the distance. She could see tiny figures moving between buildings. This wasn't a lonely mountain outpost. This was an active, working property. "How many people work here?" she asked. 40, give or take. Mill workers, loggers, stable hands, household staff, plus seasonal workers during heavy cutting. He read her expression. "I know it's a lot. I should have told you." They reached the valley floor and followed a road, an actual road, graded and maintained, toward the main house. As they got closer, Rebecca could see the quality of the construction. Logs fitted so tight, no chinking showed. Stone foundations that looked strong enough to hold up a mountain. Windows made of real glass, not oiled paper. A man stepped out onto the wide front porch, tall, lean, in clean work clothes and polished boots. He walked toward the wagon with the easy confidence of someone who belonged here. "Mr. Winters," he called, a smile creasing his weathered face. "Good to have you back. Everything's been prepared as you requested." Mr. Winters, not Mr. Walker. The man's eyes moved to Rebecca, and his smile widened. "And this must be the missus. Welcome to Winter Ridge, ma'am. I'm James Cooper, foreman of the operation. If you need anything at all, you just let me know." Caleb climbed down, helped Rebecca descend. Her legs were shaky, from the journey or the shock, she couldn't tell. "James," Caleb said, "this is my wife, Rebecca." Wife. The word felt heavy as a stone. James shook her hand with surprising gentleness for such a rough-looking man. "Pleasure to meet you, ma'am. Caleb's told me a lot about you." Rebecca found her voice. "Has he?" "Said you were sharp as a tack and twice as tough. Said Winter Ridge would benefit from a woman's touch." James glanced at Caleb with what looked like approval. "I'd say he chose well." Rebecca wasn't sure what to say to that. Chose well, like she was a horse or a piece of equipment selected for quality. Caleb seemed to sense her discomfort. "Let's get inside. I'm sure Rebecca would like to wash up and rest." They climbed the steps to the porch. Up close, the house was even more impressive. The logs were massive, each one probably 2 feet thick. The door was heavy oak with iron fittings. Through the windows, Rebecca could see lamplight and what looked like polished wood. Caleb opened the door and stood back, letting her enter first. The interior took her breath away. A great room opened before her, 2 stories high with a massive stone fireplace at one end. Fire roared in it, filling the space with warmth. The floor was polished wood, covered with rugs that looked like they'd come from somewhere far away. Furniture, real furniture, not rough-hewn chairs and tables, but crafted pieces with cushions and carved details, filled the space in comfortable arrangements. Paintings hung on the walls, mountains and forests done in oils that caught the firelight. Lamps with glass chimneys sat on tables, books lined shelves. A staircase curved up to the second floor, the banisters smooth and gleaming. This wasn't rustic mountain living. This was wealth, comfort, permanence. A woman in a neat apron emerged from a doorway, carrying a tray. She was perhaps 40, with dark hair pulled back and intelligent eyes. She smiled at Caleb, then looked at Rebecca with frank curiosity. "Mr. Winters, welcome home. And this must be Mrs. Winters." She set the tray on a side table. "I'm Grace Chen, head of household. I've prepared the master bedroom and drawn a bath. Thought you might want to rest after the journey." Rebecca stared at the tray. Real china cups, white and delicate. A teapot that steamed gently, small cookies arranged on a plate. She looked down at her own hands. Rough from work, dirt under the nails despite her efforts to stay clean on the trail. Her dress was dusty and wrinkled, the hem stained with mud. She felt like a stray dog that had wandered into a palace. She couldn't finish the sentence, didn't know what she meant to say. Caleb stepped closer, not touching her, but near enough that she could feel his presence. "Grace, could you show Rebecca to the bedroom? I'll bring her things." Grace nodded, her smile warm. "Of course. Right this way, Mrs. Winters." Rebecca followed in a daze. They climbed the curved staircase, walked down a hallway with more paintings, more polished wood. Grace opened a door at the end. The bedroom was bigger than the entire cabin Rebecca had grown up in. A 4-poster bed dominated one wall, covered in quilts that looked handmade but expensive. A wardrobe stood against another wall, a dressing table with a real mirror. And beyond an open door, Rebecca could see a bathing room with an actual tub. "I'll leave you to freshen up," Grace said. "If you need anything, pull that cord by the bed and someone will come. Supper will be in about 2 hours." She left, closing the door softly. Rebecca stood in the middle of the room, turning slowly. Taking in the windows with their heavy curtains, the washstand with a china pitcher and a bowl, the rug under her feet that was softer than anything she'd ever stood on. This was her room now, her home. She'd married a man she thought was a poor mountain trapper. Instead, she'd married, what? A timber baron? A rich man playing at poverty? She walked to the window and looked out at the valley. From this height, she could see most of Winter Ridge. The river, the meadows, the dark forests climbing the slopes. Men working in the distance, tending to whatever needed tending. A whole world functioning, all of it apparently belonging to the man she'd married 3 days ago. The man she'd thought she was saving herself for, trading her freedom to rescue her family. But he hadn't needed saving. He'd needed, what? A wife who didn't know he was rich? A woman he could test? Rebecca pressed her forehead against the cool glass and felt tears burn her eyes. She'd kept her promise to her mother. Her family was safe, the debt paid, Sam and Eliza and her father protected. But she'd walked into a trap she hadn't seen coming. A golden cage instead of a rough cabin, but a cage nonetheless. Because what choice did she have now? Go back to Pine Ridge and admit she'd been fooled? Return to poverty after living in this house? Face the town's whispers and judgment? She was Mrs. Caleb Winters now. For better or worse, this was her life. The question was, what was she going to do about it? The journalist is leaning forward, completely absorbed. She must have felt betrayed. Betrayed, foolish, trapped. I nod. But Rebecca wasn't the type to wallow. She was angry, yes. But more than that, she was starting to think. About what? About what kind of man goes to such lengths to hide his wealth. About why someone with all this would want a poor girl from a dying mining town. I smile slightly. Rebecca might have been poor, but she wasn't naive. She knew something didn't add up. What did she do? First, she took that bath Grace had drawn, because practical matters first, emotions second. That was Rebecca's way. The bath was the finest thing Rebecca had ever experienced. Hot water, actually hot, heated in the kitchen and carried up in buckets. Soap that smelled of lavender. A tub deep enough to sink into. She scrubbed 3 days of trail dust from her skin and tried not to think about how much this luxury cost, how many people had worked to provide it. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a robe that had been laid out for her, she found her small bundle of belongings on the bed. Next to it sat several new dresses, undergarments, a nightgown, all in fabrics finer than anything she'd owned. A note in masculine handwriting. "These were my mother's. Grace says you're about the same size. If they don't suit, we can have new ones made." See, Rebecca picked up one of the dresses. Simple cut, forest green, good quality fabric. She held it up to the mirror. It would fit near enough. His mother's clothes, another piece of the puzzle. A mother who'd worn fine dresses and lived in this house and died? When? How? Caleb hadn't mentioned her. So many things he hadn't mentioned. Rebecca dressed in one of the simpler dresses, pinned up her damp hair, and steeled herself. Time to face whatever came next. She found her way downstairs, following the sound of voices. In the great room, Caleb stood talking with James Cooper. They both looked up when she entered. "Better?" Caleb asked. "Cleaner." Rebecca kept her voice neutral. "Thank you for the bath and the clothes." "Of course." He seemed uncertain, like he didn't know how to act now that she'd seen everything. "Are you hungry? Grace can bring something if you don't want to wait for supper." "I'm fine." Rebecca walked to the fireplace, studying the paintings above it. One showed this very valley in summer, wildflowers covering the meadows. Another showed a man and woman standing in front of a half-built cabin, the beginning of winter house, she guessed. "My parents," Caleb confirmed, following her gaze, "the year they started building." "Where is your mother now?" "She died when I was 12. Fever that the doctor couldn't break." His voice went flat. "My father never really recovered. He threw himself into the business after that." Rebecca studied the painted woman. She had kind eyes and a gentle smile. Rebecca wondered if she would have approved of her son's wife, wondered if she would have understood the strange circumstances that brought them together. James cleared his throat. "I should get back to the mill. Rebecca, it was good to meet you. I'm sure we'll be seeing plenty of each other." After he left, silence filled the room. Caleb and Rebecca stood on opposite sides of the fire, the space between them feeling wider than the valley outside. "You're angry," Caleb finally said. "I'm trying to decide if I have the right to be." Rebecca turned to face him. "You paid my father's debt. You married me according to law. You've given me a home nicer than anything I could have imagined. On paper, I should be grateful. But you're not. I'm confused." She chose her words carefully. "You stood in my father's cabin and said you weren't a rich man. You let me think I was marrying someone who lived hard and simple. You watched me count pennies in the trading post, knowing you could buy the whole store without blinking. Why?" Caleb moved to one of the chairs, sat heavily. "Because I needed to know." "Know what?" "If you could see me." He looked up at her. "In Denver, women hear the name Winters, and they see dollar signs. They calculate what I'm worth and what marriage to me could buy them. Some are obvious about it, some subtle, but it's always there. The money between me and any genuine connection. So you tested me. I wanted to meet you without all this." He gestured at the room. "Wanted you to know the man I am when I'm not being Caleb Winters, timber baron, and heir to my father's empire. Wanted to see if we could talk, really talk, without wealth hanging between us like a curtain. And now? Now you know. Everything." He stood, came closer, but not too close. "And you have every right to be angry. I should have told you before we married. Should have given you all the facts so you could choose with open eyes. I was selfish, and I'm sorry." Rebecca studied his face. She could see genuine regret there, genuine desire to make things right. But she could also see fear that she'd reject him, reject this, reject everything, now that she knew the truth. "What happens if I want to leave?" she asked quietly. Pain flashed across his face, but he answered steadily. "Then I'll take you back to Pine Ridge. Your family's debt will stay paid. I'll make sure they have enough to get by. You'll be free." "Just like that?" "Just like that," he paused. "Though I hope you won't. I hope you'll give this a chance. Give me a chance." "Why me?" the question burst out. "You could have anyone. Why come to a poor mining town for a wife?" "Because rich women want what I can give them, not who I am, and because—" he hesitated, then continued, "because I saw you standing up to that trader, arguing for fair weight on flour. You were half his size, and he was cheating you, and you didn't back down. You demanded what was right, even knowing you had no power. And I thought, that's strength, real strength. That's the kind of person I want beside me. I was protecting my family's money." "You were protecting your dignity." Caleb's voice was firm. "There's a difference. You could have just accepted the bad deal, gone home angry. But you stood there and made him correct it, made him see you as a person worth honest dealing." "That takes courage." Rebecca didn't know what to say. She'd never thought of that moment as particularly brave. It had just seemed necessary. "I need time," she finally said. "Time to think, to understand all this. Time to decide if I can trust you." "That's fair." Caleb nodded. "Take all the time you need. The house is yours to explore. James can show you the operation if you're interested. Grace can help you settle in. Whatever you need." "What about you? What do you need?" The question seemed to surprise him. "I need you to be honest with me. If you hate this, tell me. If you want changes, tell me. If you decide to leave—" his voice caught slightly. "Tell me that, too. Don't just disappear into politeness and resentment." "I won't." Rebecca met his eyes. "I'm not good at hiding what I think." For the first time since they'd entered the valley, Caleb smiled. A real smile, reaching his eyes. "I know. It's one of the things I like most about you." A bell chimed somewhere in the house. Grace appeared in the doorway. "Supper is ready if you'd like to come to the dining room." They ate at a long table that could have seated 20 but held just the two of them, one at each end. The distance felt symbolic. Too much space, too much formality, two people trying to find their way across a gap neither of them fully understood. But the food was good. Roasted chicken, vegetables from the estate's garden, fresh bread that melted in Rebecca's mouth. She ate slowly, savoring flavors she hadn't tasted in years. Tried not to feel guilty that her family was probably eating thin soup while she dined on roasted meat. After supper, Caleb showed her the library, a whole room devoted to books, floor-to-ceiling shelves full of them. Rebecca's eyes went wide. More books than she'd seen in her entire life, all in one place. "You can read any of them," Caleb said. "My father collected them. I've added some. Take whatever you'd like to your room." Rebecca pulled down a volume at random. Poetry. Real published poetry, not the cheap paperbacks she'd borrowed from me. She held it like it might vanish. "Thank you," she whispered. That night she lay in the enormous bed, one lamp burning low, the poetry book open on her lap. Through the window she could see stars over the valley, the same stars that shone over Pine Ridge, the same sky that covered her family's cabin. But everything else was different. She thought about Caleb's words, about wanting someone who saw him, not his money, about looking for strength and honesty instead of calculation. She thought about the way he'd slept on the floor at Dutch's station to give her space, the way he'd steadied her on rough trail without making her feel weak, the way he'd answered her questions honestly, even when the answers made him look bad. Maybe he'd been wrong to hide his wealth, but maybe he'd been right about why Rebecca didn't love him, didn't know if she ever would. But she was starting to understand him, and understanding, she thought, might be a place to start. She read poetry until her eyes grew heavy, then blew out the lamp and settled into bed. The mattress was soft, the quilts warm. Outside, an owl called to the night. Tomorrow she would explore this new world, learn its rhythms, meet its people, figure out where she fit in all this unexpected luxury. Tonight, she would sleep and dream of mountains and promises kept and paths that led to places you never expected. I pause again, watching the journalist scribble notes. That first night at Winter House, he says, did she really accept it that quickly? Accept it? No, but Rebecca was practical. She couldn't unmarry Caleb, couldn't undo the choices that brought her there. I stand, my joints creaking. So she did what she always did, made the best of what she had. What happened next? Next came the hard part. I moved to the window, looking out at the mountains. Because Caleb had paid the debt and given her a home. But there were other people with other plans. And not everyone was happy about the new Mrs. Winters. The journalist pencil hovers. Catherine? Eventually. But first, Rebecca had to learn what Winter Ridge really was, what it meant, and what people wanted to take from it. I turned back to him. You hungry? This next part needs proper telling, and proper telling needs food. We take a break for lunch. The journalist practically vibrates with impatience, but I make him wait. Some stories can't be rushed. After we've eaten, I settle back into my chair and pick up where I left off. Rebecca spent her first week at Winter House like a woman learning a foreign language. Everything was familiar but strange. Meals appeared on tables without her having to cook them. Fires stayed lit without her tending them. Clothes she left for washing came back clean and pressed. It was luxury beyond anything she'd imagined, and it made her deeply uncomfortable. She wasn't used to being idle. At home, every moment had been filled with work. Here, work happened around her, done by other hands. Grace Chen seemed to sense her unease. The third morning, she found Rebecca in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, trying to help with breakfast. Mrs. Winters, Grace said gently, you don't need to do that. I need to do something, Rebecca's voice was tight. I can't just sit while everyone else works. Grace studied her for a moment, then nodded. Come with me. She led Rebecca through the house, showing her how everything functioned. The pantry, the linen closet, the schedules for cleaning and maintenance, showed her the household accounts, rows of numbers tracking every expense. The previous master, Mr. Winters Sr., used to say a house runs on good management, Grace said. His wife kept these books before she died. After that, he did them himself. Now Caleb does them. But I think he'd be grateful for help. Rebecca looked at the neat columns, the careful records. This she understood. Numbers, budgets, making resources stretch. Could I really help with this? If you wanted to. Grace's smile was warm. And if you wanted to learn how the whole operation works, the mill, the timber contracts, all of it, I think James Cooper would be happy to show you. Caleb mentioned you might be interested. He did? He said you had opinions about fair practices and worker treatment, said those opinions were worth hearing. Rebecca felt something warm bloom in her chest. He'd been paying attention, really paying attention, not just to what she said, but to what mattered to her. That afternoon, James Cooper took her on a tour of the property. They rode horses, Rebecca on a gentle mare, James on a rangy gelding. She hadn't ridden much, but the horse was patient, and James was a good teacher. He showed her the sawmill, explaining how logs came down from the high timber, got cut and processed, then shipped to Denver and beyond. Showed her the workers' cabins, neat little structures with good roofs and real windows. Mr. Winters Sr. believed in treating men fair, James said. Good wages, safe conditions, decent housing. Said a man who felt valued would do better work than one who felt cheated. And Caleb believes the same? More so, if anything. He's turned down profitable contracts because they wanted him to cut faster than was safe. Rather lose money than lose men. James glanced at her. That's not common in this business. Most owners would take the contract and worry about safety later. They stopped on a ridge overlooking the valley. James pointed out the boundaries of Winter Ridge, miles of forest, all of it belonging to the Winters family. Railroad's been sniffing around, he said. Want to run a line right through here? Maybe build a town at the valley entrance. They've offered serious money." What does Caleb say? Says no. Says his father told him to protect this place, keep it from being carved up. Says some things are worth more than money. James paused. Not everyone agrees with him on that. Who doesn't agree? But James just shook his head. That's not my story to tell. You'd best ask Caleb. That night at supper, they'd started eating at the same end of the table now, close enough to talk. Rebecca asked, James said people want to buy Winter Ridge. For a railroad? Caleb set down his fork. The board of directors wants to sell. They think I'm being sentimental, holding on to land that could generate enormous profit. They don't understand that some places need protecting. The board, dude? Winter's Timber is a company, not just me. My father set it up that way to protect it if anything happened to him. There's a board of directors, investors, people with stakes in the business. He paused. My Aunt Catherine is on the board. She's been pushing hardest for the sale. Your aunt wants you to sell your home. She wants the company to maximize profit. In her mind, keeping Winter Ridge untouched is wasteful. All this timber just standing here when it could be sold, all this land when it could be developed. His voice was tight. She thinks I'm too much like my father, too idealistic, not practical enough. What do you think? I think my father spent 30 years building something that mattered. He could have clear-cut these mountains and made twice the money, but he chose selective cutting, sustainable practices, left the land able to recover, and he kept this valley pristine because he believed some places were sacred. Caleb met her eyes. I'm not going to undo that for railroad money. Rebecca thought about the mountains she'd grown up in, the slides and muddy streams, the poisoned water where mines had leaked, the ugly scars where timber companies had cut everything and moved on. You're right, she said quietly. Some places need protecting. Caleb looked at her like she'd given him something precious. You understand. I've seen what happens when men only think about profit. I've seen good land ruined because someone wanted to squeeze out one more dollar. She paused. Your father was right, and so are you. The conversation shifted to other things, but something had changed. A connection forming, built not on romance, but on shared values, on seeing the world in similar ways. Later that night, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She got up, pulled on the robe Grace had provided, and wandered downstairs. The house was dark and quiet, except for the crackling of banked fires. She found herself in the library, drawn by the promise of books and solitude. Lit a lamp and began browsing the shelves, looking for something to quiet her restless mind. That's when she heard the noise. A soft sound like something scraping, coming from the far corner of the library near the tall windows. Rebecca froze, listened. There it was again, definitely not imagination. She picked up the lamp, moving quietly toward the sound. As she got closer, she could see a shadow moving near one of the windows. Someone was inside the library with her. Her heart hammered. Should she call for help, confront them, run? Before she could decide, the shadow moved into her lamplight. A man, rough clothes, face she didn't recognize, and in his hands, papers. He was rifling through the desk near the window, searching for something. Their eyes met. For a frozen moment, neither moved. Then the intruder bolted for the window. Rebecca didn't think. She grabbed the nearest heavy object, a brass candlestick, and threw it. Her aim was true. It caught the man in the shoulder, making him stumble. "Caleb!" she screamed. "James! Someone!" The intruder recovered, shoved the window open, and dove through. By the time footsteps thundered down the stairs, he was gone into the night. Caleb burst into the library, rifle in hand, wearing only trousers. James came right behind him, also armed. They found Rebecca standing by the open window, breathing hard, the lamp still clutched in her shaking hand. "What happened?" Caleb demanded. "Someone was here, going through the desk." Rebecca pointed at the scattered papers. "He ran when I found him." James was already at the window, looking out into the darkness. Long gone by now. Damn it! Caleb set down the rifle and came to Rebecca. "Are you hurt?" "No, just scared." Now that it was over, her knees felt weak. "I'm sorry, I couldn't sleep. I came down to read, and there he was." "Don't apologize. You probably stopped him from finding whatever he was looking for." Caleb turned to the desk, examining the papers. His face went grim. Deeds. He was looking for the property deeds. "Why?" Rebecca asked. "Because whoever sent him wants to know exactly what land Winter Ridge includes, exact boundaries, exact ownership." Caleb's jaw tightened. "They're planning something," James cursed under his breath. "Has to be the railroad. They've tried buying you out. Now they're trying to find another way." "Or someone on the board sent him." Caleb gathered the scattered papers carefully. "Either way, this is escalating." He looked at Rebecca with something like pride. "You threw a candlestick at him?" "It was the nearest thing I could reach." A smile tugged at his mouth despite the seriousness of the situation. "Remind me never to make you angry." Over the next hour they secured the house, checked all the windows and doors. James posted men to watch through the night. Caleb moved the deeds to a safe hidden behind a painting in his bedroom. Finally, as dawn began to gray the windows, he walked Rebecca back to her room. "You should rest," he said. "So should you." He nodded, but didn't move, just stood there in the hallway looking at her. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not panicking, for raising the alarm, for being," he paused, searching for words, "for being exactly who you are." Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I just reacted." "You reacted like someone who knows how to handle trouble, like someone I'm grateful to have on my side." "On my side, not as property or decoration, but as an ally, a partner." "Get some sleep, Caleb. You too." But neither of them slept much. Too much adrenaline, too many questions spinning. Who had sent the intruder? What were they planning? And how far would they go to get what they wanted? Rebecca lay in bed watching the sun rise over the mountains, thinking about railroad money and board meetings and people who saw Winter Ridge as nothing but profit waiting to be extracted. Caleb was trying to protect something beautiful, something his father had built with care and left him to steward. And now, whether she'd meant to or not, Rebecca was part of that fight. The thought should have scared her. Instead, it made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. She'd spent years just surviving, just holding her family together through one crisis after another. Here she could do more than survive. She could help protect something worth protecting, if they'd let her, if they didn't destroy it first. 2 days later, the carriage arrived. Rebecca was in the garden behind the house. They had a real garden, tended by a man whose only job was to grow vegetables and herbs, when she heard the commotion out front. She came around the side of the house to find a gleaming black carriage pulled by 4 matched horses, far too fine for mountain roads, clearly built for city streets. Someone rich enough not to care if the undercarriage got damaged. The door opened and a woman stepped out. She was perhaps 50, tall and elegant in a traveling dress of deep blue. Her hair was perfectly arranged under a fashionable hat. Her face was handsome rather than beautiful, with sharp cheekbones and intelligent gray eyes that took in everything with one sweep. Those eyes found Rebecca immediately, assessed her from head to toe in a glance that felt like being weighed and found wanting. "You must be the surprise," the woman said. Her voice was cultured, cold. "I'm Catherine Winters, Caleb's aunt." 2 men climbed out of the carriage behind her, city suits, polished shoes, completely wrong for this environment. They looked around Winter Ridge with calculating expressions, like they were already pricing everything they saw. Caleb emerged from the house, James right behind him. Rebecca saw his whole body go tense. "Catherine," his voice was carefully neutral, "this is unexpected." "Is it?" She moved toward him with the confidence of someone who owned whatever ground she walked on. "Your secretary mentioned you'd married. I thought I should meet my new niece." Her tone made it clear what she thought of said niece. Inside the house, Catherine walked through like she was cataloging assets, touched furniture, examined paintings, looked at everything with cool appraisal. The 2 men with her introduced themselves. "Samuel Pierce, investor. Mr. Harrison, lawyer." both tied to the winter's timber board. They settled in the great room. Grace brought tea, but the social niceties felt like theater before battle. Catherine looked at Rebecca over the rim of her cup. "So you're from Pine Ridge, a mining town, I believe?" "Yes, ma'am." "And your father is—" "A miner. Was a miner. He's ill now." "I see." Catherine set down her cup with a delicate clink. "And you met Caleb how exactly?" Rebecca felt the trap in the question. However she answered would sound bad. If she said he came courting, they'd wonder why a timber baron courted a poor girl. If she mentioned the debt, she'd sound like she'd been bought. Caleb spoke before she could answer. "I met Rebecca in town. We married last week." "How sudden?" Catherine's smile didn't reach her eyes. "One might even say hasty." "One might say it's none of your business," Caleb replied evenly. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Samuel Pierce cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could discuss the matter we came to address, the railroad proposal?" "There's nothing to discuss," Caleb said. "I've told the board my position. Winter Ridge isn't for sale." "The board disagrees," Catherine said. "We have a fiduciary responsibility to maximize shareholder value. Keeping prime land undeveloped when we could generate substantial profit from its sale is irresponsible. My father's will specifically—" "Your father's will left the company to you, yes. But the company is governed by a board, and the board can vote to override your objections if they believe you're acting against the company's interests." Rebecca listened, piecing together the dynamics. Catherine was trying to take control, use the board to force Caleb's hand. "This has nothing to do with the company," Caleb said. "Winter Ridge is my private property, held separately. You can't force me to sell my home." "Can't we?" The lawyer, Harrison, spoke for the first time. "Your father's will is quite complex, as you know. There are conditions on your inheritance, certain requirements you must meet." "I'm meeting them." "Are you?" Catherine's voice was sharp now, the polite veneer cracking. "A stable marriage is one of the requirements. A marriage that demonstrates sound judgment and strengthens the family's standing in the territory." Her eyes moved to Rebecca. The meaning was clear. "My marriage is legal and binding," Caleb said, anger creeping into his voice. "Legal, yes, but is it suitable?" Catherine stood, moving to look out the window. "Caleb, I understand sentiment, but this is business. You've married a girl with no connections, no social standing, no ability to navigate the circles necessary for someone in your position. The board will see this as evidence of poor judgment, evidence that you're not capable of leading the company." "The board can go to hell." "The board can remove you." Catherine turned back. "If we determine you're mismanaging assets or acting irrationally, and marrying a mining town girl on a whim could certainly be seen that way." Rebecca felt her face burn. She wanted to argue, to defend herself. But what could she say? Everything Catherine said was factually true. Rebecca had no connections, no standing, no experience in business or society. "What do you want, Catherine?" Caleb's voice was dangerous now. "I want you to see reason. Sell Winter Ridge to the railroad. Use the money to expand the business properly. And," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "perhaps reconsider this hasty marriage, an annulment on grounds of—" "Get out." Caleb stood. "All of you. Now." "Caleb, I said get out. This is my home and you're not welcome in it." Catherine's face went cold as marble. "You're making a mistake. A very serious mistake. The only mistake I made was letting you through my door." He moved to stand beside Rebecca, a clear statement of solidarity. "My marriage stands. My land stays mine. And if the board has a problem with that, they can take it up with my lawyers." Pierce and Harrison exchanged glances. This wasn't going according to their plan. Catherine pulled on her gloves with sharp, controlled movements. "Very well, but understand this, Caleb. I'm trying to protect you. Protect the family legacy. If you won't listen to reason, I'll have to take other measures." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise." She moved toward the door, the men following. "I'll give you 1 week to reconsider. After that, the board will act, with or without your cooperation." They left in a sweep of skirts and polished shoes, the carriage rolling away down the mountain road. The house was silent in their wake. Rebecca stood frozen, Catherine's words ringing in her head. Poor judgment. Not suitable. A mistake. Caleb turned to her. Rebecca, she's right. Her voice came out hollow. About all of it. I don't have connections or standing. I can't help you with your business. You're my wife. He said it firmly. You're smart and capable, and you care about doing what's right. That's worth more than all the social connections in Denver. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, I just became a weapon they can use against you. Caleb looked like she'd struck him, but he couldn't deny it. Catherine had made that clear enough. Rebecca walked to the window, looking out at the valley, the beautiful, pristine valley that people wanted to carve up and sell. The home Caleb was trying to protect, the life he'd built and was now risking by marrying her. What did she mean about a week? Rebecca asked quietly. The board is meeting in Denver. They're going to try to force my hand. Probably threaten to remove me if I don't comply. Can they do that? Not legally, not without cause, but they can make things difficult. He came to stand beside her. Don't let Catherine get in your head. She's good at finding weaknesses and exploiting them. She didn't have to look hard for mine. Rebecca, she turned to face him, I need to know the truth. If I stay, if we fight this together, what are we really facing? Because I won't be your weakness. I won't be the reason you lose everything your father built. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he took her hand, the first time he'd touched her with real intimacy since their wedding. If we fight this together, he said quietly, we're facing people with money and power who want Winter Ridge for profit. We're facing a board that thinks I'm too sentimental. We're facing Catherine, who's never forgiven my father for certain choices and takes it out on me. But what choices? That's a long story. I'll tell you someday. He squeezed her hand gently. But here's what matters right now. I don't regret marrying you. Not for a second. You're not my weakness. You might be my greatest strength if you choose to be. Rebecca wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe she could be more than the poor girl who'd been bought to save her family. But Catherine's cold eyes and colder words echoed in her head. Not suitable. Poor judgment. A mistake. What happens in a week? She asked. We go to Denver, face the board, show them they're wrong about you. His voice was grim. And hope we survive whatever Catherine has planned. Outside, storm clouds were gathering over the peaks. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of snow from high elevations. Winter was coming early to Winter Ridge, and with it, a battle for everything Caleb had been trying to protect. Rebecca looked at the man she'd married, this stranger who'd become her husband, her responsibility, maybe even her friend. Then we'd better prepare, she said, because ready or not, the war for Winter Ridge had begun. The journalist arrives early, clutching a telegram. I sent inquiries to Denver, he says, excitement in his voice. The archives have records of that board meeting, and the governor's reception in November 1885. It all happened exactly as you've been describing. I smile over my coffee. Did you think I was inventing it? No, but, he sits, spreading his notes. The official records make it sound so dry. Mrs. Rebecca Winters appointed as territorial advisor on forestry matters. They don't capture what it must have been like. Official records never do. I settle into my chair. They don't tell you about the week before that appointment, about what it took to prepare Rebecca for that room, about what Catherine did to ensure she'd fail. Tell me. Pour yourself coffee first. This part takes telling slow. After Catherine left, Winter Ridge felt different, like a house waiting for the next shoe to drop. Men checked the property boundaries more carefully. James doubled the night watch. Caleb spent hours in his study, going over legal documents and company papers. Rebecca felt useless. She wandered the big house, tried to help Grace with household tasks, attempted to make sense of the business ledgers. But nothing she did felt like enough. Catherine's words had burrowed into her mind like splinters. Not suitable. Poor judgment. A mistake. On the third day after Catherine's visit, Rebecca found Caleb in the library. He was reading a letter, face grim. The board meeting is set, he said without looking up. 1 week from today, in Denver. What will they do? Try to force a vote on selling Winter Ridge. Try to question my fitness to run the company. He finally met her eyes. They'll bring up our marriage, question my judgment. So Catherine said. She also arranged something else. He handed her the letter. There is a reception at the governor's mansion the night before the board meeting. All the territory's important people will be there. Business leaders, politicians, society women. Catherine made sure we were invited. Rebecca scanned the formal invitation. Governor and Mrs. Richard Hartwell request the pleasure of your company. She wants to humiliate me, Rebecca said quietly. Put me in a room full of people who'll see exactly what I am, a poor girl who doesn't belong. Or she wants to give you a chance to prove her wrong. Caleb stood, came around the desk. I know which one I believe you'll do. You have more faith than I do. Then let me share some of mine. He gestured to the chair beside his desk. Sit. We need to talk strategy. Over the next hour, he explained what they were facing. The board could challenge his decisions, but couldn't remove him without proving gross incompetence or breach of trust. The marriage itself wasn't grounds unless they could show it damaged the company's interests. That's where the reception comes in, Caleb said. If you walk into that room and can't hold your own, if you seem overwhelmed or out of place, they'll use it as evidence. Say I married rashly, without considering the social requirements of my position, which is true. Which is irrelevant, his voice was firm, because you're more capable than any of those society women. You just need to learn their language. In a week? People have learned more in less time with proper motivation. He smiled slightly. And I've never seen anyone more motivated than you when you decide something matters. Rebecca wanted to argue, but he was right. When she decided to save her family, nothing had stopped her. Maybe she could do this too. What do I need to learn? Caleb's smile widened. Everything. And we start now. What followed was the most intense week of Rebecca's life. Grace became her teacher in social graces. How to walk into a formal room, how to greet people of different ranks, how to handle multiple courses at dinner without confusion. 100 tiny details that wealthy women absorbed from childhood, but Rebecca had to cram into days. Think of it as a performance, Grace said. You're playing a role, Mrs. Caleb Winters, confident and capable. Just like you played the role of miner's daughter keeping her family fed. Same skills, different costume. That helped. Rebecca understood roles, had been playing them her whole life. James Cooper, surprisingly, taught her about the business, walked her through the timber operation, explained contracts and profit margins, taught her the language of commerce. You'll need to talk intelligently if anyone asks about the company, he said. Don't pretend to know more than you do, but know enough to hold a conversation. And Caleb taught her about Winter Ridge itself, the history of the valley, the timber practices his father had pioneered, the reasons they refused the railroad's offers. You need to understand what we're protecting, he said, not just in numbers, but in meaning. They rode out one afternoon, just the two of them, up to a high ridge overlooking the valley. Caleb pointed out the different sections of forest. See how the timber is different ages? That's selective cutting. We take mature trees, leave young ones to grow, give the forest time to recover before we come back. He gestured to the mountains beyond. Compare that to over there. That's land the Sterling Timber Company worked 5 years ago. Rebecca could see the difference. Where Winter Ridge showed healthy green with gaps where trees had been taken, the Sterling land showed brown scars and erosion. Whole hillsides stripped bare. When the rains come, that soil washes away, Caleb explained. Clogs the streams, kills the fish. In a few years, nothing will grow there. They made quick money and left the land dead. And the railroad would do the same? Worse. They'd clear cut for the track, sell the timber cheap and fast, build a town with no thought for what it would do to the watershed. In 10 years, this valley would be a muddy scar. His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. My father spent 30 years learning how to work with the land instead of just taking from it. I won't let that knowledge die for railroad money. Rebecca looked at the pristine valley, the river running clear, the forests breathing and alive. Thought about Pine Ridge and the poisoned streams from the mines, the slides that had buried cabins after timber companies cut the hillsides bare. "They have to be stopped," she said. Caleb looked at her. "You believe that? I've seen what happens when men only care about profit. I've lived in the wreckage they leave behind." She met his eyes. "Your father was right. This is worth protecting." Something shifted in his face. Relief, gratitude, and something deeper. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for understanding." They rode back in comfortable silence. And that night at dinner, Rebecca asked him the question she'd been holding back. "Why did Catherine hate your father's choices? What did he do that she never forgave?" Caleb set down his fork slowly. "That's complicated. Most important things are." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "My father was the youngest of 3 siblings. Catherine was the oldest, then my Uncle Thomas, then my father Heinrich. They were German immigrants, came over with nothing. Catherine and Thomas went into business in Denver, made money in dry goods and trading, built themselves up. And your father? Went into the mountains, worked in timber camps. They thought he was wasting his potential, throwing away his chance at respectable society." Caleb paused. "Then he met my mother. She was a homesteader's daughter, poor, no connections, barely educated. But she could read the forest like other people read books. She taught him about the land, about sustainable practices." Rebecca's heart beat faster. This story sounded familiar. "Catherine was furious when they married," Caleb continued. "Said he was ruining the family's chances at respectability, that he should marry someone who could help them rise in society, not drag them down to poverty." His voice went flat. "She never spoke to him again, not for 23 years, not until my mother died." "She came to the funeral?" "She came. And the first thing she said to my father was, 'I hope you're satisfied. This is what comes of marrying beneath yourself.'" Caleb's hands clenched. "My father threw her out, told her she was dead to him, and she vowed that she'd never let the family be brought low by inappropriate marriage again." Understanding crashed over Rebecca. "I'm her second chance. She couldn't stop your father, so she's trying to stop you." "Yes." He met her eyes. "You're the ghost of my mother to her. Another poor girl marrying above her station, threatening the family's standing. She'll do everything she can to prove you're a mistake." "Maybe I am." "You're not." He reached across the table, took her hand. "My mother built this place as much as my father did. She knew the land, understood what it needed. She's the one who convinced him to practice selective cutting instead of clear cutting. She's the reason Winter Ridge still stands beautiful instead of stripped bare." His grip tightened. "Catherine saw her as an embarrassment. My father saw her as the smartest person he'd ever met. I know which one of them was right." Rebecca looked down at their joined hands. This was the most intimate they'd been since the wedding, and it felt right somehow, built on respect and shared purpose instead of just obligation. "I won't let her win," Rebecca said quietly. "I won't let her use me to take this away from you. We won't let her win." He squeezed her hand gently. "Together. Together." The word felt like a promise. 3 days before they were due to leave for Denver, Rebecca received a letter. Grace brought it to her while she was in the library, practicing formal conversation with Caleb. The handwriting on the envelope was familiar, her father's cramped, careful script. Rebecca's hands shook as she opened it. "My dear daughter, I hope this letter finds you well. I pray every day that you are safe, and that your husband treats you kindly. Sam and Eliza ask about you constantly. They miss you terribly, as do I. The debt has been paid in full, Mr. Walker, your husband, was true to his word. We received provisions as well, enough to see us through winter comfortably. You have saved us, Rebecca. I will spend the rest of my life knowing I bought your sacrifice with my failures, but that is not why I write. Yesterday a woman came to Pine Ridge, well-dressed, from Denver, asking questions about you, about our family, our circumstances, how you and Mr. Walker met. She was polite, but her questions felt like knives, cutting and probing. Mrs. Sullivan refused to speak with her, but others in town were not so careful. They told her everything, about the debt, about Mr. Walker's offer, about how quickly the wedding happened. She wrote it all down in a little book, like she was gathering evidence. I fear we have brought you trouble. I fear whatever you are walking into may be harder because of us. Be careful, daughter. Be strong. You have always been the strongest of us all. Your mother knew it. I know it. Trust in that strength now. With love and sorrow. Your father, P.S. Eliza, insisted I include a note from her. It is enclosed. Rebecca's hands were shaking harder now. She unfolded the second piece of paper, recognizing her sister's rounder handwriting. Becca, Pa says I shouldn't write this, but I don't care. That woman who came asking questions was mean, not loud mean, but cold mean. She smiled like a snake, and her eyes were hard. She wanted to know bad things about you. Wanted people to say you were desperate or scheming or something. Mrs. Sullivan told her to leave and never come back. I was proud of Mrs. Sullivan, but some other people talked. Mr. Peterson at the trading post told her about you arguing over weights. Made it sound like you were difficult instead of just standing up for yourself. I'm scared for you, Becca. This woman wants to hurt you. I can feel it. Please be careful. Please come home safe. I'm sorry I was angry when you left. I understand now why you did it. You're the bravest person I know. Your sister, Eliza P.P.S. I'm learning to read better, using the books you left behind. Someday I'll be as smart as you. Rebecca looked up to find Caleb watching her with concern. What is it? She handed him the letters without speaking, watched his face darken as he read. Catherine, he said grimly, building a case against you, gathering ammunition. She went to my town, talked to my neighbors. Rebecca's voice shook. She's going to use my poverty, my father's debt, everything about me as proof I'm unsuitable. Let her try. Caleb's voice was hard. We'll be ready. But Rebecca felt the weight of it settling on her shoulders. Catherine wasn't just attacking her marriage. She was attacking her whole life, her family, everything she'd come from, turning Rebecca's survival into evidence of unworthiness. James Cooper appeared in the doorway. Got a minute, Caleb? There's something you need to see. They followed him to his office in the mill building. On his desk lay a map of Winter Ridge, marked with survey lines and notations. These were stuck in the mill door this morning, James said. Railroad survey maps, updated ones, from just last week. Caleb studied them, face going pale. They've surveyed inside our boundaries, without permission, without even asking. James pointed to marks on the map. They've planned out the whole route, where the track goes, where the town would sit, where they'd put the timber mill. They're moving forward like the sale is already done. How is that possible? Rebecca asked. Because someone told them it was. Caleb's voice was dangerous. Someone gave them enough confidence to spend money on detailed surveys. Someone on the board, probably Catherine herself, promised them this land. Can they do that if you won't sell? Not legally. But if Catherine convinces the board to remove me from leadership, claiming I'm mismanaging the company, she could be appointed conservator. Then she'd have the authority to sell. He looked at James. That's her game. She's already promised the railroad they'll get Winter Ridge. Now she just has to remove the obstacle. Me. And your marriage to Rebecca is her excuse, James finished. The three of them stood looking at the maps, the future Catherine had planned without their consent. A future where Winter Ridge was carved up and sold, where the pristine valley became a rail town and the forests fell to clear-cutting. Rebecca thought about her father's letter, about Catherine going to Pine Ridge, gathering evidence, about the cold, calculating woman who'd stood in this house and called Rebecca unsuitable. Catherine had been planning this for a while, probably since the moment she'd heard about the marriage, maybe longer. This wasn't just about Rebecca. This was about controlling Caleb, controlling the company, getting the railroad money. Rebecca was just the convenient weapon. What do we do? She asked. Caleb rolled up the maps carefully. We go to Denver, we face the board, and we make damn sure Catherine doesn't get what she wants. How? by proving you're not just suitable, you're exactly what this company needs." He looked at her with fierce determination. "By showing everyone in that ballroom that you understand Winter Ridge better than Catherine ever could, that you'll fight for it harder than anyone." "I'm not a fighter." "Yes, you are," James spoke up. "You've been fighting your whole life. Fought to keep your family together, fought to survive poverty, fought to stand up for fair treatment. You just didn't call it fighting. You called it living." His words struck something deep in Rebecca. He was right. She'd been fighting all along. She just hadn't recognized it as strength. "Then I'll fight this too," she said quietly. "Whatever it takes." That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Catherine's cold eyes and calculated cruelty, about the ballroom full of people ready to judge her, about all the ways she could fail. Around midnight, she gave up and went downstairs, found Caleb in his study, papers spread across the desk, lamp burning low. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "Too much in my head." She sat in the chair across from him. "Tell me about your mother." He looked surprised. "Why?" "Because Catherine hated her for the same reasons she hates me. Because your father loved her anyway. I want to know what that looked like." Caleb leaned back, a distant look in his eyes. "She was quiet, didn't talk much in company, but when she did speak, people listened because what she said was worth hearing. She knew plants and animals, could track a deer for miles, could read weather in the wind." "How did they meet?" "She saved his life." A small smile crossed his face. "He got lost in a blizzard, stumbled onto her father's homestead, half frozen. She nursed him back to health over 2 weeks. By the time he could travel, he knew he'd found something more valuable than all the timber in these mountains." "Did she love him back?" "Eventually. She didn't trust easy. Too many men had tried to court her just to get her father's land. But my father kept coming back, kept proving he wanted her, not her property. Took him a year to convince her. They were married in a ceremony so small only the minister and her father attended. And Catherine refused to come, sent a letter saying she wouldn't witness the family's degradation." His voice went hard. "My mother knew about that letter. Knew the whole family thought she wasn't good enough. It hurt her, I could see it. But she never let it stop her from being exactly who she was." Rebecca absorbed this. A woman who knew her worth even when others denied it. Who built a life and a legacy despite the rejection. "Do you remember her well?" "Bits and pieces. I was 12 when she died. I remember her teaching me about trees, which ones to cut, which to leave. Remember her laugh, rare but genuine. Remember the way my father looked at her, like she was the only real thing in a world of shadows." He paused. "I remember the funeral. How Catherine came and said those awful things. How my father had her physically removed from the property. And she's never forgiven him. Or you or me for following his example." Caleb met her eyes. "But here's what Catherine doesn't understand. My father's degradation built all this. His partnership with my mother created something that lasted. While Catherine climbed society ladders and made the right connections and worried about appearances, my parents built something real, something worth protecting. You think we can do the same? I think we already are." He stood, came around the desk. "Rebecca, I know this started as a transaction. I know you married me out of necessity, not choice. But what we're building now, this partnership, this fight for Winter Ridge, that's real. That's worth something." She looked up at him, this man she'd married while barely knowing, who'd turned out to be someone completely different than expected, who looked at her now not with ownership but with respect. "I'm still angry you didn't tell me the truth from the start," she said. "I know. And I'm terrified I'm going to fail you in Denver. Stand in that ballroom and prove Catherine right about everything." "You won't." "How do you know?" He held out his hand. "Because I've seen you throw candlesticks at intruders, argue with traitors twice your size, decide to trust a stranger because it was the only way to save your family. You don't fail when it matters." Rebecca took his hand, let him pull her to her feet. They stood close, closer than they'd been since the wedding. She could see gold flecks in his blue eyes, smell the pine and wood smoke that clung to him. "I don't know how to be what they expect," she admitted. "Then don't be. Be what you are. That's stronger." For a moment she thought he might kiss her. saw the want in his face, the careful restraint, but he just squeezed her hand and stepped back. "Get some sleep," he said. "We leave for Denver in 2 days. You'll need your strength." Rebecca nodded and headed for the stairs. At the door, she paused. "Caleb?" "Yes?" "Thank you for believing I can do this." "I don't just believe it, I know it." His voice was firm. "You're stronger than Catherine will ever be. You just haven't realized it yet." Rebecca carried those words with her to bed, lay in the darkness thinking about Caleb's mother, who'd been judged and dismissed but built something that lasted. About her own mother, who'd made her promise to keep the family together no matter what. She'd kept that promise. Married a stranger, left her home, walked into unknown territory. Now she just had to keep walking. Into Denver, into that ballroom, into whatever Catherine had planned. And somehow come out the other side still standing. I paused to refill our coffee. The journalist is writing so fast his hand cramps. "Catherine sounds terrible," he says, like she wanted to destroy Rebecca out of spite. It wasn't quite that simple. I sit back down. Catherine was a complicated woman. Hard, yes. Calculating, absolutely. But she believed she was protecting the family. In her mind, Rebecca was a threat to everything she'd worked for. But Rebecca hadn't done anything wrong. No, but she represented something Catherine had hated for decades. The idea that love and choice mattered more than social standing and wealth. Catherine had spent her whole life believing the opposite, believing her brother ruined himself by marrying for love. Rebecca's very existence challenged that belief. What happened next? I smile. They went to Denver, and Rebecca discovered just how deep Catherine's plans went. The journey to Denver took 2 days by coach. Caleb had arranged for a proper carriage this time, not the rough wagon they'd used coming to Winter Ridge. Rebecca wore one of the dresses Grace had altered for her, simple but well-made, forest green like the pines. Her hair was pinned up in a style Grace had taught her, severe but elegant. She looked, Grace had assured her, like exactly what she was, Mrs. Caleb Winters, capable and composed. Rebecca just hoped she could live up to the appearance. They stopped the first night at a way station much nicer than Dutch's cabin, a proper inn with real beds and hot food. Over dinner, Caleb went over strategy one more time. "The reception is tomorrow night. The board meeting is the day after." He pushed food around his plate. "Catherine will use the reception to show you're unsuitable. She'll introduce you to people who'll judge you, put you in situations where you might stumble. Every mistake will be ammunition. So I don't make mistakes. You make them human, not catastrophic." He met her eyes. "If you don't know which fork to use, watch me and follow. If someone asks a question you can't answer, say so honestly. People respect honesty more than fumbling lies, and if Catherine tries to bait you into anger, stay calm. Don't give her the satisfaction." "What about the board meeting?" "That's different. That's business. Catherine will try to prove I'm mismanaging the company by making rash decisions, like our marriage. She'll call witnesses, present evidence of my poor judgment. She's probably already got votes lined up. Can she win? If she controls the narrative, yes." He paused. "But there's one person who could change that, the governor. If he supports our marriage, supports what we're trying to do with Winter Ridge, the board will have to listen. He has influence they can't ignore. So I need to convince the governor? We need to convince him. Show him you're not some helpless girl I married on a whim. Show him you understand what's at stake with the land. Show him you'll fight for it." Rebecca felt the weight of it. Everything rested on one night, one reception, one chance to prove herself. "What if I can't do it?" Caleb reached across the table, took her hand. "Then we lose Winter Ridge, I probably lose the company, and we start over somewhere else, together." "You'd do that? Give up everything?" "I'd give up the business before I'd give up on you." He said it quietly, firmly. "My father taught me some things are worth more than money. I'm still learning which things, but I know you're one of them." Rebecca's throat was tight. This man she'd married for duty had somehow become someone she cared about, someone she trusted. Maybe even someone she could love, given time. "I won't let you lose it," she said. "I'll do whatever it takes." "I know you will." He squeezed her hand gently. That's what scares Catherine. She knows it, too. They reached Denver late the next afternoon. The city had grown since Rebecca's childhood visit. More buildings, taller and grander. Telegraph wires crisscrossed the sky. Trains came and went from the new station, belching smoke and noise. People filled the streets in numbers that made Rebecca's head spin. She gripped the carriage door, trying not to let her anxiety show. "Overwhelming?" Caleb asked quietly. "Yes." "You'll get used to it. Cities have their own rhythm, same as forests. You just have to find the pattern." They pulled up to a grand hotel, the Windsor, with its ornate facade and doormen in uniform. Inside was even more impressive. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, thick carpets that silenced footsteps. Wealth on display everywhere Rebecca looked. A man at the front desk greeted Caleb by name, clearly knew him well. "Mr. Winters, welcome back. We have your usual suite prepared." Suite. Not a room, a suite. A porter carried their luggage upstairs. The rooms were bigger than Rebecca's entire cabin in Pine Ridge. Sitting room, bedroom, separate bathing room. Windows overlooking the city. "Rest," Caleb said. "I'll have the hotel send up tea. The reception doesn't start until 8. You'll want to be fresh." After he left, Rebecca stood at the window, looking down at Denver. Somewhere in this city was Catherine, preparing her attack. Somewhere were the board members who'd vote on Caleb's fate. Somewhere was the governor who could change everything. And tonight, Rebecca would walk into a room full of them and try to prove she belonged. A soft knock at the door. A maid entered with tea and something else. A box, large and wrapped in plain paper. "For you, ma'am, from Mrs. Sullivan in Pine Ridge. Arrived this morning." Rebecca's heart jumped. She tipped the maid and opened the box with shaking hands. Inside was a dress. New fabric, carefully sewn. Not fancy like Denver fashion, but elegant in its simplicity. Deep green, the color of pine forests after rain. And with it, a note in Martha Sullivan's handwriting. "Rebecca, I heard about the woman asking questions. Heard about Catherine Winters and her plans. So I'm sending this. Made it myself from fabric I've been saving for something special. Figured you're something special enough. You walk into that Denver ballroom with your head high. You're worth 10 of any woman who was born to silk and privilege. You survived poverty and loss and took care of your family when grown men would have quit. That's real strength, child. Don't let them make you small. Don't let them tell you where you belong. You belong wherever you decide to stand." With love, Martha Sullivan, P.S. Your father and the children are well. Sam asks about you every day. Eliza is reading like her life depends on it. They're proud of you, Rebecca. We all are. Rebecca held the dress to her chest and cried. Not from fear or sadness, but from gratitude, from the knowledge that she wasn't alone in this fight. She had people who believed in her. Martha, her family, Caleb, Grace, James, people who saw her worth even when she struggled to see it herself. She dried her eyes and held the dress up to the mirror. It fit perfectly. Martha had remembered her size from years of selling her fabric. The color brought out the green in her eyes, made her auburn hair glow in the lamplight. This was the dress she'd wear tonight. Not borrowed finery or altered hand-me-downs, but something made with love by someone who believed in her. She'd walk into that ballroom as herself, Rebecca Stone Winters, miner's daughter and timber baron's wife. Poor girl and fighter. And she'd show Catherine exactly what that combination could do. The governor's mansion blazed with light. Carriages lined the drive, disgorging passengers in silk and jewels. Music drifted from open windows. Through the glass, Rebecca could see people moving like bright fish in an aquarium. Her stomach clenched with nerves. Caleb helped her down from the carriage, offered his arm. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. "That color suits you." "Martha sent it, made it herself. Then she gave you armor as well as a dress." He looked at her seriously. "Ready?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." His smile was fierce. That's my girl. They climbed the steps. A doorman opened the massive doors. Inside, the entrance hall was full of people, men in evening dress, women in gowns that probably cost more than Rebecca's family made in a year. Diamonds glittered at throats and wrists. Perfume hung thick in the air. A man at the entrance called out names as people entered. Mr. Caleb Winters and Mrs. Rebecca Winters. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Eyes assessed Rebecca from head to toe in the span of a heartbeat. She lifted her chin and walked forward on Caleb's arm. The ballroom opened before them. Chandeliers threw light across polished marble. An orchestra played in the corner. Tables laden with food lined one wall. And everywhere, people. Talking, laughing, networking, playing the games of society and power. "Caleb!" A man approached, hand extended, distinguished, gray at the temples, warm smile. "Good to see you. And this must be your bride. Rebecca, this is Governor Hartwell." Caleb made the introduction smoothly. The governor took Rebecca's hand with genuine warmth. "Mrs. Winters, I've been eager to meet you, heard quite a bit about you lately." Rebecca's heart sank. What had he heard? Catherine's version, probably. "I hope it wasn't all terrible, sir," she managed. He laughed. "Actually, Mrs. Sullivan from Pine Ridge sent me a rather spirited letter, told me I'd be a fool not to meet you myself and form my own opinion. She speaks very highly of you. Martha. Bless her interfering, wonderful heart." "Mrs. Sullivan is kind," Rebecca said. "She's also, in my experience, an excellent judge of character." The governor's eyes were shrewd. "I'm looking forward to speaking with you more this evening. I have questions about the high country that I suspect you might answer better than most." "I'd be honored, sir." He nodded and moved on to greet other guests. Caleb leaned close to her ear. "That was good. Natural, respectful, without being servile. Keep doing exactly that." They moved through the room. Caleb introduced her to people whose names blurred together. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, timber investors. Senator Carleton and his wife. The mayor of Denver. On and on, a parade of faces and titles. Most were polite. Some were warm. A few looked at her with thinly veiled curiosity or disdain. Clearly they'd heard Catherine's version of events. Then, across the room, Rebecca saw her. Catherine stood near the windows, wrapped in burgundy silk, gray hair perfectly arranged. She was talking to a cluster of well-dressed women, gesturing elegantly. When her eyes found Rebecca, she smiled. It was not a kind smile. She excused herself from her group and glided toward them. The crowd seemed to part for her, recognizing her power and presence. "Caleb, Rebecca." She greeted them with perfect courtesy. "How lovely you both look. Rebecca, that dress is charming, quite rustic. Did you make it yourself?" The insult was subtle but clear. "Your dress marks you as poor as someone who sews her own clothes because she can't afford better." "A friend made it for me," Rebecca said evenly. "As a gift. I value things made with care more than things bought for show." Catherine's smile tightened. "How practical. I suppose that comes from your background. One learns to value different things when resources are limited." "One learns what really matters," Rebecca replied, "which isn't always what costs the most." A flicker of annoyance crossed Catherine's face. She'd expected Rebecca to be cowed or embarrassed. Instead, Rebecca had pushed back, gently but firmly. "Well?" Catherine's tone went cold. "I'm sure you'll have an educational evening. Denver society can be quite instructive for those new to it. Come, let me introduce you to some people who are eager to meet Caleb's surprise bride." It wasn't an invitation, it was a command. Catherine led them to a group of women, all older, all wealthy, all watching Rebecca like hawks eyeing a mouse. "Ladies, this is Rebecca Winters, Caleb's new wife." Catherine's tone made it sound like a curiosity being displayed. "Rebecca, these are some of Denver's most established women. Mrs. Blackwood, Mrs. Sterling, Mrs. Harrison. I believe you know Mr. Harrison, Caleb's corporate lawyer." Mrs. Harrison smiled thinly. "Indeed, we were so surprised to hear about the wedding. So sudden. We'd all assumed Caleb would choose someone from our circles." I chose someone who understood real life, Caleb said quietly, not just society games. How refreshing. Mrs. Sterling's voice dripped skepticism. Tell me, Mrs. Winters, what did you do before your marriage? I understand you're from a mining town? Pine Ridge, yes. I helped run my family's household, managed our resources, kept the books, handled trading in town. How industrious. Mrs. Blackwood made it sound like an insult. I suppose necessity teaches many skills, though perhaps not the ones useful in Denver society. Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice level. I wouldn't know about Denver society, ma'am, but I know about hard work, fair dealing, and taking care of the people who depend on you. I imagine those skills are useful anywhere. Charming. Catherine's voice was silk over steel, though one does wonder if those skills translate to managing a large estate and supporting a significant business enterprise. It's such a different world from, say, counting pennies at a trading post. There it was, the knife sliding in, disguised as concern. Rebecca opened her mouth to respond, but a new voice interrupted. Actually, Mrs. Winters, I'd love to hear your perspective on something. Governor Hartwell had appeared at Rebecca's elbow. The circle of women immediately shifted their demeanor, all smiles and deference for the territorial governor. Governor, Catherine said smoothly, how wonderful. We were just getting to know Rebecca better. I'm sure. His tone suggested he knew exactly what kind of getting to know was happening. But I'm afraid I must steal her away. I have questions about timber practices in the high country, and I understand Mrs. Winters has direct experience with sustainable forestry. Rebecca blinked. She'd never claimed expertise in forestry, but the governor was offering her an escape, and she grabbed it. I'd be happy to share what I know, sir. He offered his arm, and she took it, letting him guide her away from Catherine's circle. She could feel their eyes on her back, measuring, judging. The governor led her to a quieter corner, away from the main crowd. You looked like you needed rescuing. Was it that obvious? Catherine Winters, in full attack mode, is pretty obvious. He smiled. Don't take it personally. She treats everyone she considers beneath her like that, which in her mind is everyone except herself. You know her well? Well enough to know she's a formidable businesswoman and a terrible human being. He gestured to a seat. Please, I actually do want to talk with you, and not about forestry, though we can get to that. Rebecca sat, confused and grateful. What do you want to talk about? About why Catherine is so determined to destroy you. He leaned back, studying her. I've known the Winters family for years. Knew Heinrich, Caleb's father. Good man. Brilliant in his way. And Catherine hated him for most of his life. Do you know why? Because he married a woman she thought was unsuitable. Partly, but it's deeper than that. The governor's voice went thoughtful. Catherine loved her brother. Really loved him. Not in any improper way, but with the kind of devotion that becomes obsession. She'd built a life plan for the family, social advancement, wealth, respectability. Heinrich was supposed to be part of that. Marry well, have important children, help elevate the family name. But he married for love instead. He married a homesteader's daughter and disappeared into the mountains, built a business Catherine couldn't control, lived a life she couldn't understand. And he was happy. That's what really killed her. He was happier with his poor wife and his mountain timber operation than he would have been with all of Catherine's carefully laid plans. Rebecca absorbed this. So she's doing to me what she couldn't do to his wife. Exactly. She couldn't stop Heinrich, but she can still stop Caleb, can still prove that her way, wealth, status, calculated marriages, is right. He looked at her seriously. You scare her, Mrs. Winters. Because if you succeed, if your marriage to Caleb works, it proves everything she believes is wrong. It proves love and authenticity matter more than social standing. I don't want to prove anything. I just want to protect Winter Ridge. That's what makes you dangerous. The governor smiled. Catherine fights for pride and control. You fight for something real, That's a much stronger motivation. Before Rebecca could respond, a commotion at the entrance drew their attention. The doorman was announcing new arrivals, but something seemed off. The crowd was murmuring, heads turning. "Mr. Samuel Pierce and guest," the doorman called. Pierce, the railroad investor, entered with a woman on his arm. But Rebecca's attention locked on the second announcement. "Miss Eliza Stone of Pine Ridge, Colorado." Rebecca's heart stopped. Eliza stood in the doorway, 14 years old, and looking terrified. She wore what must be her Sunday best, a dress that was clean but obviously old, too short in the sleeves from recent growth. Her hair was pinned up in a style that looked like she'd tried to copy pictures in magazines. And beside her, with a proprietary hand on her arm, was Samuel Pierce. Rebecca was on her feet and moving before she could think. She heard the governor call after her, heard Caleb's voice, but nothing mattered except reaching her sister. Eliza saw her coming, and her face crumpled with relief. "Becca!" Rebecca grabbed her sister's arm, pulling her away from Pierce. "What are you doing here? How did you get here?" Eliza's voice shook. "Mr. Pierce came to Pine Ridge, said he was a friend of yours, said you wanted me to come to Denver for a visit. Pa was so sick I thought—" "He's not a friend." Rebecca's voice was cold as she turned to Pierce. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Pierce smiled, unruffled. "Bringing your sister to visit, as you can see. She was so eager to see you. Said your father had been worried about you." It was a lie. A calculated, cruel lie. And Rebecca saw the trap immediately. Catherine had done this, sent Pierce to bring Eliza here, to this ballroom full of society's elite, probably told her some story about Rebecca wanting her to visit, knowing a poor, frightened 14-year-old would jump at the chance. And now Eliza stood in the governor's mansion in her threadbare dress and home-pinned hair, looking exactly like what she was, a poor mining town girl, completely out of her depth, living proof of Rebecca's unsuitable background. Catherine materialized at Rebecca's shoulder. "Oh my, is this a sister of yours, Rebecca?" "How unexpected. Though I suppose family is family, no matter how they present themselves." The cruelty was breathtaking. Catherine had brought Eliza here specifically to embarrass Rebecca, to show everyone the poverty she came from, the unsophisticated family she'd dragged into Caleb's life. Rebecca felt Eliza tremble beside her, saw the tears starting in her sister's eyes as she realized she'd walked into a trap. And something inside Rebecca snapped, not into anger, into clarity. She put her arm around Eliza's shoulders and faced Catherine with a calm that surprised even herself. "Yes, this is my sister Eliza, and you're right, family is family, no matter what games people play to try to humiliate them." She turned to the watching crowd, because everyone was watching now, eager for drama. "Eliza walked into a trap tonight. Someone told her lies to get her here, knowing she'd look out of place, knowing her presence would embarrass me." Rebecca's voice carried across the suddenly quiet room. "But I'm not embarrassed. I'm proud. Proud of a sister brave enough to travel alone to a strange city because she was told her family needed her. Proud of a girl who's learning to read despite having no formal schooling. Proud of a family that survived poverty and loss without losing their dignity." She looked directly at Catherine. "The only person who should be embarrassed tonight is whoever thought using a child as a weapon was acceptable behavior." The room was silent. Catherine's face had gone white with fury. Governor Hartwell stepped forward. "Well said, Mrs. Winters." He looked at Eliza with kindness. "Young lady, you must be exhausted from your journey. Why don't we find you some refreshment? I'd like to hear about Pine Ridge. I'm considering some territorial initiatives that might benefit mining communities." He offered Eliza his arm, the same courtesy he'd show any society lady. Eliza looked at Rebecca with uncertainty. "Go ahead," Rebecca said gently. "The governor's a good man. You'll be safe." As Hartwell led Eliza away, Caleb appeared at Rebecca's side. He looked at her with something like awe. That was, he couldn't seem to find words. "Necessary," Rebecca finished. She turned to face the crowd, lifted her chin. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to make sure my sister is all right." She's had a long journey and deserves better treatment than she's received tonight. She walked away from Catherine, from Pierce, from all the watching eyes. Walked toward her sister and the governor and the only thing that mattered, protecting family. Behind her the crowd erupted in whispers, but Rebecca didn't care what they said. She'd just declared war on Catherine Winters, and she had no intention of losing. I pause, watching the journalist's stunned expression. She brought a child into it, he says. Catherine actually used Eliza as a weapon. She did, and it backfired spectacularly. I smile. Because Rebecca wasn't some helpless girl who could be embarrassed into submission. She was a woman who'd spent her life protecting her family, and you don't threaten what someone loves without consequences. What happened next? Next came the real battle. I stand stretching my old bones. The board meeting where Catherine would try to take everything, and Rebecca's moment in front of the whole territory's leadership. Tell me. Not yet. I move to the window. Sun's getting low. Come back tomorrow for the end. Some stories need the night between tellings. Let them settle. Build anticipation. The journalist looks frustrated, but nods. After he leaves, I stand alone in my store, watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. Tomorrow, I'll tell him how it ended, how Rebecca faced the board, how she turned Catherine's attack into her greatest strength, how a miner's daughter became the woman who saved Winter Ridge. But tonight, I'll sit with the memory of Rebecca in that ballroom, arm around her frightened sister, facing down the people who wanted to break her. That's the moment she became unstoppable. That's the moment Catherine Winters realized she'd made a terrible mistake. Tomorrow, I'll tell him how that mistake cost her everything. But tonight belongs to the story of a girl who refused to be ashamed of where she came from, and in refusing became something greater than anyone expected. The board meeting took place in a hotel conference room that smelled of cigars and ambition. 10 men sat around a polished table, investors, company directors, lawyers. Catherine presided at the head like a queen at court. Caleb sat halfway down, Rebecca beside him. The only woman in the room besides Catherine. Samuel Pierce opened with his report. The railroad's offer, the survey maps, the projected profits if Winter Ridge was sold and developed, numbers that made some of the board members lean forward with interest. Then Catherine spoke. "Gentlemen, we must address the elephant in the room, our CEO's recent marriage." She looked at Rebecca with cold precision. "I mean no disrespect to Mrs. Winters personally, but we must consider whether this impulsive decision demonstrates the sound judgment necessary to lead this company." Mr. Harrison, the lawyer, shuffled papers. "There are concerns about Mr. Winters' decision-making. The refusal of the railroad offer against board recommendation, the marriage to someone with no business experience or social connections, the continued resistance to profitable expansion." "My father's will requires stable judgment," Caleb said, "not profitable expansion at any cost." "Your father's will requires you to act in the company's best interests," Catherine countered. "I'm questioning whether you're capable of that anymore." The trap was sprung. They'd use the marriage, use Rebecca, to paint Caleb as unfit. Then vote to remove him, appoint Catherine as conservator, sell Winter Ridge. Rebecca felt the room closing in, felt the weight of these men's judgment, their calculations of her worth measured in social connections she didn't have. Then she remembered the governor's words from the previous night. "You fight for something real. That's stronger." She stood. The room went silent. Women didn't speak at board meetings, didn't interrupt business discussions. Rebecca didn't care. "May I say something?" Catherine's eyes narrowed. "This is a board meeting, not a social call. Let her speak." The voice came from the doorway. Governor Hartwell stood there, having entered unnoticed during the presentations. His presence changed the room's dynamic immediately. Board members straightened. Even Catherine looked rattled. "Governor," she managed, "this is a private business meeting about territorial resources and land use, which makes it my business." He moved to stand beside Rebecca. "I'd like to hear what Mrs. Winters has to say. After last night, I think she's earned the right to be heard." Rebecca's heart pounded. This was it, her one chance. She didn't talk about legal documents or technicalities. She talked about mountains. "I grew up in Pine Ridge," she began, "in a cabin where we could see what happened when timber companies strip-cut the hillsides. We watched the slides come down after heavy rain, watched brown water poison the streams, watched families lose everything because someone wanted profit more than they wanted to protect the land." She looked around the table. "You're talking about Winter Ridge like it's just money waiting to be extracted. But I've walked that valley. I've seen how Caleb's father designed the timber operation to work with the forest, not against it. Selective cutting that lets the land recover, buffer zones along the river to prevent erosion, practices that keep the forest alive for the next generation." "Very touching," Catherine said. "But this is business. Let me finish." Rebecca's voice was firm. "The railroad wants to clear cut for their route, build a town with no thought for the watershed. In 10 years, that valley will be a muddy scar and the river will run poisoned. Every community downstream will pay the price for your profit." She turned to the governor. "Sir, you said last night you were considering initiatives to protect mountain communities. Winter Ridge is the model for how it should be done. Profitable timber work that doesn't destroy what it touches. If you let them sell it, you lose the best example in the territory of how to balance industry with conservation." Hartwell nodded slowly. "Go on." "You asked me last night about timber practices. Here's what I know. Caleb's operation employs 40 families year-round with fair wages and safe conditions. Other companies hire seasonal workers, pay them nothing, and move on when the timber's gone. Caleb replants. Others don't. Caleb leaves the land able to recover. Others leave scars." She looked at Catherine. "You think I'm unsuitable because I'm poor, because I don't have the right connections or background, but I know what it means when rich men make decisions about land they'll never have to live with the consequences of. I've lived those consequences my whole life." Her voice strengthened. "So yes, maybe I'm not qualified by your standards, but I understand what you're trying to protect here better than anyone in this room. And I'll fight for Winter Ridge because it's one of the last places where someone chose to do things right instead of just profitable." The room was silent. Then Governor Hartwell spoke. "Gentlemen, I came here today to offer Mrs. Winters a position, an unpaid advisory role to the territorial government on forestry and mountain community issues. After hearing her speak, I'm more convinced than ever that we need her perspective." He pulled a document from his coat. "This is a letter of appointment, effective immediately, giving Mrs. Winters standing as a territorial advisor on natural resource management." Catherine's face went white. "You can't." "I can and I have." Hartwell's voice was steel. "And I'm also recommending to the territorial legislature that Winter Ridge be designated as protected demonstration land, not available for sale or development, a model for sustainable forestry practices." He looked at the board. "So here's what I suggest. You can vote to remove Mr. Winters and fight the territorial government in court for years, or you can recognize that he's doing exactly what this territory needs, showing that business and conservation can coexist. Your choice." Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. With Mrs. Winters now holding a territorial appointment, the question of the marriage demonstrating poor judgment becomes difficult to sustain. One by one, the board members nodded. The wind had shifted. What Catherine meant as evidence of Caleb's unfitness had become proof of his wisdom. Pierce tried one last time. "The railroad offer is irrelevant," the governor said flatly. "Winter Ridge won't be sold. Not now, not ever. The territorial designation will ensure that." Catherine sat frozen, watching her carefully constructed attack collapse. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. Caleb remained as CEO. The railroad offer was declined. Winter Ridge would stay protected. Catherine stood without a word and walked out. Samuel Pierce and Mr. Harrison followed. The meeting dissolved. Rebecca found herself shaking. Caleb's hand found hers under the table, squeezed gently. "You did it," he whispered. "We did it." Governor Hartwell approached. "That was quite a speech, Mrs. Winters. Meant every word of that appointment, by the way. I expect you to take it seriously." "I will, sir. Thank you," he smiled. "Thank your sister." Watching you defend her last night showed me exactly who you are. Someone who fights for what matters. That's what this territory needs." They found Eliza at the hotel, being looked after by Grace Chen, who'd come to Denver with them. The girl threw herself into Rebecca's arms, crying, "I'm so sorry, Becca. I didn't know it was a trick." "Hush. You did nothing wrong." Rebecca held her tight. "You were brave, and you helped more than you know." They took Eliza home to Pine Ridge the next day. Thomas Stone wept when he saw them, holding both his daughters like he'd never let go. "You won," he said to Rebecca. "Mrs. Sullivan told me you beat them. I kept my promise, Pa. We're all together. We're all safe." Back at Winter Ridge, winter settled over the valley like a blessing. Snow covered the meadows, ice formed at the river's edge, and smoke rose from 40 chimneys where families lived secure in their work. Rebecca stood on the porch one evening, wrapped in a warm cloak, watching the stars come out. Caleb joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Regrets?" he asked. "About marrying a man who lied about being poor?" She smiled up at him. "Every day." "Good thing I'm rich then, can afford your complaints." She laughed and leaned against him, comfortable in a way she'd never expected to be. They'd started as strangers bound by necessity, become partners in battle. And now, slowly, were becoming something more, something real and chosen. "I love you," Caleb said quietly. "I know I didn't earn the right to say it, but it's true." Rebecca thought about love, about choice and necessity, and the strange paths that led to unexpected places. "I'm getting there," she said honestly. "Ask me again in a year." "I will." They stood together, watching their valley breathe and settle into winter, protected now, safe, a legacy preserved for whatever came next. I finish my story as the sun sets over Pine Ridge. The journalist has stopped writing, just listening. "And?" he prompts. "And they lived. Not happily ever after, that's for fairy tales, but they built something real. 3 children, 30 more years of sustainable forestry. Rebecca advised 3 governors on conservation policy. Caleb expanded the business without destroying the land." I smile. Catherine moved to San Francisco, died alone and bitter 10 years ago. And Winter Ridge? Still standing, still beautiful. Rebecca's oldest daughter runs it now, carrying on what her grandparents started. The journalist closes his notebook. "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan, for the real story. You'll write it true? As true as I can." After he leaves, I lock up the store and stand on the boardwalk, looking at the mountains. Somewhere up there, hidden in the high country, Winter Ridge holds its secrets and its beauty. And somewhere, I like to think, the ghosts of Heinrich Winters and his homesteader wife smile, knowing their son found what they had. A partner worth fighting for. A love built on truth and shared purpose. Rebecca came to my store last month, gray in her hair now, lines around her eyes, but still straight-backed and strong. "Thank you," she said, for the dress, for believing in me." "You did it yourself, child." "No," she took my hand. "We all did it. You, Caleb, Martha, Eliza, everyone who refused to let me be small. That's what I want people to know. I didn't win alone. Nobody does." She's right. Nobody wins alone. But some people, when given the chance, rise so far beyond what anyone expected that the whole world has to step back and reconsider what's possible. Rebecca Stone was a miner's daughter who married for duty and became a woman who changed territorial law, not because she was chosen for greatness, but because she chose it for herself. That's the story worth telling. That's the legend worth remembering. And that's the truth I'll take to my grave.